November 13th, 2017, and this is a regular meeting of District 64 Board of Education. Tom is not here, so I will take the roll. Eastman?
Here.
Mark?
Here.
Rick? Here. Tony's here. Larry?
Here.
And Fred?
Here.
Okay. Tonight we have a lot, as usual, a lot to discuss. But first there is a recommendation to go into a closed session to discuss 5 Illinois Compiled Statute 122C1 regarding a district employee, 5 Illinois Compiled Statute 122C2, the upcoming mediation with the SSC, and a third one, an issue that arose just this past Friday regarding a student, 5 Illinois Compiled Statute 122C10. For this, I've made the motion. I'll need a second.
Second.
We'll need a voice vote, so starting with Fred.
Yes.
Larry? Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Okay, we'll go into close. Everybody ready? Welcome, everybody. The board is back from a closed session, and tonight is a regular board meeting of District 64. I'm going to, because we have so many friends with Mrs. Daly tonight, we're going to change things around a little bit, and we're going to have the opening and presentation for Washington School, and help us with the pledge.
Great, thank
so
you.
Please.
I'd like to introduce our Student Council representatives. Lead us in the pledge. I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Stephanie Daly, the principal here at Washington, and this is our assistant, Ms. Sherry Lazor. I'd like to thank the board and Dr. Hines for being here at Washington tonight. Welcome. While we have the student council reps here, we would like to recognize the board. November is the Recognize the Board Month, so if you guys could come up as we call your name, the kids would like to give you a little something. And while they're doing that, I would just like to thank you guys for all your tireless efforts and hard work and dedication to the district. I know it's a tough job, so thank you.
Board Member 2, come and join us over here so we can show just a small token of our appreciation for your dedicated service to District 64. Okay, next, Board Member Sanchez. Okay, next, helpers come up. Next, we may have Board Member Riles. Thank you. Nice job. Next, Board Member Eggman. Board Member Sotos, please come up. Mrs. Daly, have they ever been this quiet? This is amazing. Okay. Board Member Biaggi, please come up. And I should have mentioned that Mr. Biaggi is our board vice president, Mr. Sotos is our secretary, and if the president of our board, Dr. Borelli, can please come up. Thank you. Now, may I have all the Washington Student Council students, if you wouldn't mind coming back up, because I want to take a picture of all of you with Mrs. Daly and Ms. Lazor and the board for our website. How does that sound? If you could come right over here. Board members, if you wouldn't mind kind of just making a small, almost crescent moon behind the kids, and we'll have them kind of fill in front of you.
Here, guys, why don't we come this way? Make a little circle right here. That's it. That's right. Turn right like this. Very good.
That's right. That's right.
All right, to kick off the night, we've put together a little video just to highlight SEL, our social emotional learning curriculum here at Washington.
In this video, you will see how different teachers here at Washington incorporate our second step and our other SEL curriculums. You will hear from students how they benefit from our curriculum, and you will hear our positive behavior program that we have in place here at Washington.
Enjoy.
All classrooms, kindergarten to 5th grade here at Washington, are using the second step program to teach critical social and emotional skills that align with Illinois state standards for social emotional learning. Topics covered include learning skills, emotional regulations, calming strategies, making and keeping friends, problem solving with peers, and bullying prevention or awareness. The second step program is a research-based curriculum that teaches skills in the following 4 areas. The first out of the 4 areas is skills for learning. Students gain skills to help themselves learn, including how to focus their attention, listen carefully, use self-talk to stay on task, and be assertive when asking for help with schoolwork. The second of the 4 areas is empathy. Here, students learn to identify and understand their own and others' feelings. Students also learn how to take another's perspective and how to show compassion. The third of the 4th area is the emotion management piece. Here, students learn specific skills for calming down when experiencing strong feelings, such as anxiety or anger. The 4th area in the second step program is problem solving. Here, students learn the process of solving problems with others in a positive way.
New to Washington this year is voice volumes. Teachers and students follow Aurora's expected behaviors, which now include voice volume levels for each location of the school. Following our expected voice volumes assists with providing uninterrupted learning throughout the building and ensures safety for all students in case of an emergency. Washington voice volume charts are placed throughout the school to remind students and staff of expected behavior.
With the addition of our Washington voice volume levels, each month we focus on a different letter of our Washington roars to promote positive student behavior throughout the school day. Students can earn roar stickers when demonstrating our Washington roars expected behaviors. In the month of September, we roared by practicing our voice volumes. Students earn their roar stickers for using a voice volume 1 in the hallway, 0 in the bathrooms and during our safety drills, and 2 in the lunchroom. In October, we roared with respect. Students can wear their roar stickers proudly throughout the day and can take them home to celebrate with families. Each sticker enters your name into a drawing for a prize from the office at the end of the week. Students can receive these stickers from any staff member at any time, so they know to always be demonstrating their Washington roars. Classrooms with the most roar stickers recipients each month get to house our Washington Wildcat stuffed animals to show their Washington Wildcat pride.
In reading, my teacher gave me a rotor sticker because she told us to pull out a book and read silently, and I did that right away. So she gave me a rotor sticker, and it's part of ownership and responsibility and respect.
We here in the Peak Department in Washington started something new this year. It's called our Conflict Corner. And what we are trying to do is help the kids take ownership of their little behaviors that they can handle themselves instead of coming to report to the teacher. We want to teach them that they have power over these little situations.
Some of the scenarios that we try to use this for are minor things such as people not following rules, things like this, where we feel like the students can really take that ownership in themselves to solve these problems instead of coming to a teacher. Obviously, bigger problems, they're going to come to us, but these smaller issues, we want them to be able to resolve themselves.
I'm happy to showcase for you today positive discipline in the classroom. It's a strategy I've been using with students for about 16 years now at Washington School. It's a time when kids get together, we have class meetings, and I teach them multiple ways to solve problems, teaching them ownership in solving their problems. And they came up with the title for our corner is the Solution Center, and they got that idea based off of PE class using Conflict Corner. So we talked about having students problem solve on their own, teaching them to bring a fellow classmate to this area, choose a strategy, and work out their problems independently.
Social emotional learning takes place in two different ways in my classroom. We have our second step lesson that happens once a week, and then I incorporate class meetings twice a week. We've built a positive learning and community in my classroom by utilizing classroom meetings. The first year I've done these, so we have two different types of class meetings. We have a compliments class meeting that happens on Friday. During this time, students have a chance to either give a compliment or receive a compliment from one of their classmates. Another type of class meeting we do during the week is a solution or issue meeting where students bring issues or problems that they're experiencing in the class or at recess, and as a group we brainstorm solutions for those problems.
It makes you feel more comfortable when you're around your classmates, and you're more aware of people's feelings. As a new student, SEL helps you know that people are going to be there to help you solve your problems. In the second step, we've been learning about empathy, and empathy is when you're in like someone else's shoe and when you feel what they're feeling.
Someone already checked out the library book that you wanted. How might he be feeling? We need to recognize feelings in other people. What do you see in his body? Emily, how?
He's feeling really sad.
Really sad? Somebody have another feeling word other than really sad? Frustrated? That's another great word. Layla? Unhappy? What did you notice, Tyler?
His hands there's like a lot.
His hand is making a fist. When you see a person making a fist like this, I want you to ask yourself, is this a comfortable feeling or an uncomfortable feeling? What do you think? Turn to your partner and tell them, comfortable? That is definitely not a comfortable feeling, right? So today, we have learned and practiced lots of different scenarios to start to recognize feelings in other people. Thank you.
We learned about how feelings are and to read someone's feelings and how to figure out what their feelings are.
Here at Washington, it's extremely important to all of us that we teach all of our students to learn the different coping skills, the importance of emotional regulation and calming strategies to promote the social emotional well-being of all of our students.
Thank you. And then real quick, I just wanted to thank the community and all of our Washington families for raising over $62,000 for our new playground. And this is one example. I just wanted to show the board. We hope to break ground this summer. So I just want to thank everybody in the district for their contributions and some Washington money, so I just wanted to publicly thank everybody, so.
Wonderful. Very exciting. Thank you.
I know there's a lot on the agenda, so I'm done talking.
Wonderful. Thank you.
All right. Well, my thanks to Ms. Daly and Ms. Lazar for your presentation and your fine welcome to the board for Board appreciation, right, exactly. Well, we'll move on to the remaining aspects of our meeting, and the board is back from closed session where discussion took place regarding an employee under 122C1, upcoming mediation with the SSC under 122C2, and 5 Illinois Compiled Statute 122C10 about a student. Our next meeting will be on December 11th and held at Jefferson starting at 6 p.m. The public hearing on the tax levy will be held and voted on at that time. The upcoming mediation with the SSC will begin on November 28th. Administration and board are already in preparation for this event. As the month of November has Board Member Appreciation Day, I personally would like to extend my thanks to the entire board for their efforts and sacrifice to aid and guide the many processes, deliberations, and concerns that affect our district and community. I'm proud of our continual efforts of outreach and increased communication to the community, our steadfast commitment towards financial prudence, and together with our administration, improving the academic experience of our students. Congratulations to this board and our predecessors for all of the collective efforts. The next item is as we turn attention to public comments. So if there are any folks in the audience who'd like to make a comment, you can approach the podium. You have a 3-minute time frame. And as long as the item is not on our agenda.
Good evening. Do you hear me? No. Good evening. Thank you for this opportunity. My name is Mickey Tessia, and I am new to Park Ridge. We just moved in June, my husband and my family and I. And we're also new to the district as well. I have a son, Christian, who is in 4th grade at Field. He is in an instructional program. He has Down syndrome. An instructional program, as you know, means that 50% of the day or less is in a segregated class. I was just informed a few weeks ago, informally, of the district's decision starting next year to segregate all children who are in an instructional class who are in 5th grade from their 5th grade peers and place them in the junior high 1 year early. So my son and one other boy at Field, whose mother is also here, will be the only 2 children in 4th grade out of hundreds of children that will be plucked out of their class and placed with 6th graders for the reason that has nothing to do with their individual needs, but has everything to do, based on my discussions with the special ed director, with administrative and financial concerns of the district. I'm here to express my concerns about this. I know Barb will express hers. I will say I've talked to 3 other parents who couldn't be here tonight, whose children are in 3rd or 4th grade, who are very concerned about this decision. And let me just tell you a few of the reasons our concerns. 1, complete lack of transparency. We were not told of this. Apparently, the district believes that it has carte blanche, unilateral discretion to make this decision without the input of the educators that are involved, outside of the IEP process, and without the parents not only not having any input, but not even notifying the parents. I found out happenstance through another parent. To say the least, I was shocked. To me, this smacks of discrimination. And I thought the days of separate is not equal is over, but apparently it's not, because I can't believe that the district would make this decision. I will tell you, I'm a lawyer by trade. I'm a litigator, but that's not what capacity I'm here as, okay? I'm here as a parent. But I have done some research, and I don't believe that the district's position is as clear-cut as I have been led to believe. because I've been told that this is a decision that the parents have absolutely no right to have involvement in as a decision as to location versus placement. I don't believe that's true. If you look at 34 CFR 300.116, which is the governing federal regulation on this very issue, and I'm happy to repeat that site, 300.116. Specifically says, unless the IEP of a child with a disability requires some other arrangement, the child is educated in the school that he or she would attend if non-disabled. In selecting the LRE, consideration is given to any potential harmful effect on the child or on the quality of services that he or she needs. And a child with a disability is not removed from education in age-appropriate regular classrooms solely because of needed modifications in the gen ed curriculum. I want to add some commentary that the Department of Education had in promulgating this regulation, which I think is also important for the district and the board to consider. Quote, the overriding rule in 300.116 is that the placement decisions for all children with disabilities must be made on an individual basis and ensure that each child with a disability is educated in the school the child would attend if not disabled, unless the child's IEP requires some other arrangement. There was no discussion. This is outside of the IEP process. There's no discussion or consideration of the individual needs of our children. This was a decision made for every single child in the district from here on in. The other part of the Department of Education's clear guidance is, it says, in all cases, placement decisions must be individually determined on the basis of each child's abilities and needs and each child's IEP, and not solely on factors such as category of disability, severity of disability, availability of special education and related services, configuration of the service delivery system, availability of space, or administrative convenience. To me, it is clear that the district can't make a decision on the placement, which I view this to be a placement issue. I would agree this was a location issue if all fifth graders had to go to junior high 1 year early. Then it's merely a change in location. This is a change in placement that will significantly affect our children. And to make this decision without asking the input of the parents, of the educators who are involved, I frankly find astounding. Now,
you know, I get your point, and it's an important point, and it serves as informational to the board, and we will need to gather more information on this, but it sounds like there's other folks in the audience who are on your same wavelength.
there's one other, and I'll just close very quickly, and that is separate and apart from what the regulations say and how they're interpreted. I just ask you, as human beings, to step back and look at the situation where my son and her son are going to be two children in 4th grade and 5th grade and placed out and taken out and away from their friends with kids that they don't know. It's hard enough for them to transition as it is. So I would ask the board, please, look into the situation, ask our input, and make a decision based on the needs of our children. Thank you.
Someone else?
I'm Ginger Pennington. So I provided a comment at the last board meeting concerning my concerns about the SRO program. And frankly, I'm a little off kilter after listening to that. I feel like the district's willingness to make decisions unilaterally is very concerning, and the SRO program is another example, though, unfortunately. So I'm not here to reiterate what I said last time, but instead I'd like to say that I've had a chance to examine the materials that have been provided by the district, the materials that have been provided for the district in response to a recent FOIA request, and I want to address those. So, you know, as we all know, one of the reasons that Dr. Hines has stated is that we need this program is related to safety, one of the reasons. And the data that you provided in these documents reiterates the fact that there's actually no substantial crime or violence problems in our schools to solve. So the 2016 end-of-year student discipline report for D64 shows less than 3% of our in-school suspensions have anything to do with violence. Less than 3% involve drugs. So I think this is just another example of how there's really not a demonstrated need for this program in the first place. But the topic I really want to use my 3 minutes to address pertains to the Department of Education and the Department of Justice best practices that we've mentioned before in light of what I learned from these documents. So, well, first of all, I think it's worth noting that the title of their best practices document is Safe School-Based Enforcement Through Collaboration, Understanding, and Respect. Okay, collaboration, understanding, and respect, which are all principles that the board claims to value. I believe that you do, but it's not being shown in this particular circumstance, and I'm hoping that tonight you'll take some steps to live up to them. I'm discouraged by seeing the paper you handed out saying basically you're going to vote on this in December. I thought that you were going to consider our input and talk to parents and collaborate. This is not collaboration if you intend to just go right ahead and vote on it. So, one of the best practices is for the district to examine MOUs or IGAs from a variety of communities around the country. So we asked, George Monaco asked in the FOIA request to see those. You provided one. Okay, I don't know, presumably, surely you looked at more than one. If so, I'm curious why you only gave us one, but the one you provided was for Park Ridge District 207. And if that's the model that we're using here, and parents get no input or review of this IGA draft, it's really problematic. I'm very concerned, and parents in Park Ridge should be as well, because in that document, by reviewing it, it's missing tons of things that the Department of Justice says we should have. At the time of hiring, officers in Park Ridge are not required to have any knowledge of or experience in matters of cultural diversity, students with disabilities, special education needs, and in fact, DO7 officers are not required to have any relevant educational background or experience at all when they're initially hired. And this is especially concerning given the data you also supplied, which shows that these are the very groups which are already disproportionately punished by our district. So disabled students make up 14.5% of our district student population, but 67% of the in-school suspensions and 85.7% of the out-of-school suspensions. Black students represent less than 1% of our student body, and yet they also represent 22% of our in-school suspensions. Okay, so this is concerning that we're adding officers into the situation that have no training dealing with these populations. So a couple other things I'll add in my remaining time, other things that are missing from that document that are concerning. There's no procedures in the document to clarify the exact role of those SROs in student discipline. There's no language specifying what student contact will be handled by, or student conduct will be handled by school officials versus the SROs, the law enforcement officers. There's no restrictions on interviewing students without their parents present. There's no procedures or guidelines for cell phone or devices searches. There's no guidelines on use of force, grounds for arrest, use of restraint, no suggested approaches for de-escalation, conflict resolution. Okay, so those are all issues that are especially relevant for students with special needs.
Can I ask you a quick question? You can just hold that time. What document are you referring to that has no outlines for
the IGA for District 207, the only document you provided?
Right. But we looked at other research. So
why didn't you provide?
Don't base what you think our IGA is going to include on 207's document.
Well, you haven't provided a draft of your IGA.
Wait until the board sees it. The board hasn't seen it. It's in draft form. It's going to come to the board in either December, or it looks more like January because of Park Ridge's council meetings. They're going to see it, and then you will actually know what it entails.
Will parents get input on that?
You'll be able to come to the meeting. You'll be able to hear.
According to that paper, the meeting, it's discussed and then voted on. Actually, the word you used was approved.
I haven't shared with the board yet because it's ahead of the agenda, but again, the city council isn't going to see it until December, so the community can go to the city council
and listen to people vote on it, and we get no say? How's that collaboration?
We are not voting on it in December. The agenda will change because this information came to me today from Hodges. We will be voting on it in January. And at that time, after you've seen what it entails, then I would welcome your feedback to say, what are we missing? Until then, it's challenging on both ends because you're assuming a lot. And that's a dangerous thing to do.
Well, a few things. I'm assuming it based on the conversations I've heard here. For instance, the meeting where you were asked if there's any problems, potential negatives or drawbacks, and the officer and yourself said no, which is clearly false. And the FOIA request clearly specified we would like to see all the MOAs or MOUs from around the country that you considered. You gave us one. So if you did in fact consider more, why didn't you give us the others?
We didn't look
Could we
at
see
more
those, please?
IGAs, but we looked at a documentation from the ACLU recommended best practices, and we pulled a lot of that.
I saw that, but that's not looking at representative documents from around the country. But okay, I mean, I'm glad you looked at that one, and I hope that you
And we pulled a
incorporate
lot
that
of very
information.
good language from there. Tony Louise is nodding his head. He was part of those conversations and development, and there's a lot of that language in the IGA.
I think it'd be less concerning to parents if we had any involvement in that process whatsoever, other than it being brought up at a meeting, discussed privately with no accountability or transparency, and then voted on at the next meeting. So I would really encourage you, if you do value collaboration and input, and part of those best practices specify that for these programs to be successful, you need parent understanding, you need community, buy-in, and that is not, up to this point, the procedures you've used do not do that at all. We all feel like we've been told this is what you're going to do, and this is what you're going to do. So I'd really appreciate if that starts to change. I don't like reading on the paper tonight that it's going to be considered and voted on in December. That's not what we were hoping we would get some input and consideration. I would like us to be able, parents and community as a whole, to be able to see that document. And it's not confrontational, it's, this is collaborative. We should be able to see that and work on it together to make sure that we're putting procedures in place that both the officers themselves have proper guidelines so that they're protected and know what they're doing, and the students and families are protected. I'm a little disturbed. If I had children in DOT 207 right now, I wouldn't be too happy at the document they have. And you can understand why, if that's what they're using, I would be concerned about what's being used here, especially given what I've seen so far in terms of procedures.
In all fairness, thank you for your comments. In all fairness, the time for your feedback would be once the board sees the document. Correct. We have not seen the document.
It's in draft form.
Well, it's in draft form. We haven't seen any document, draft or non-draft. So we can't provide any comparison. And certainly once you see that document, we would enjoy your comments to that document. I think that I have personally seen lots of emails, lots of information, lots of suggestions by you and your associates on this topic. And I can tell you that all of your comments have been heard. All of your comments have been placed in perspective with some of the things that are going into the document. Not all the things, I can tell you, but I'm sure, knowing our superintendent and her thoroughness, I'm sure that everything has been listened to and adjudicated and tried to fit in where it can fit in. I think it's not fair, honestly, to have this particular document compared against something.
Well, when it's the only one you
Let me finish. This document that is not completed, that hasn't been approved, is being compared against another document that was only used as a resource. So the long and the short of it is, we're far, far, far away from passing this.
I hope so.
And well, we are. I mean, literally, we are. And I think that the time for discussion, comments, good or bad, really needs to wait until we get the document.
But my concern is that, again, according to everything that, and apparently what I was told from somebody at the city council meeting tonight, the information being portrayed is this will soon be read, reviewed, and voted on. I'm asking tonight, I don't want to see people voting on it until there's been community input, not just me standing up here or others for 3 minutes talking, but actual collaboration and speaking about this. I mean, we've all seen some of the cases, some of the ugly cases from around the country, and most of them involve special needs students being handcuffed and drug out of the school, students that are severely autistic and don't even like their parents touching them. And I'm not saying, yes, I believe our officers are good officers and they have good intentions, but you can't ask parents to just trust the good intentions. That's not good policy. That's not, we've seen historically that's not a great thing to do. We need clear guidelines, and so do the officers.
And it is very much addressed in the IGA. It is a very restrictive role that our SROs will have relative to.
I was going to wait until later in the agenda when the item came up, but I just want to make a couple points. First of all, I know from first-hand experience that both the administration and the board has considered a lot of feedback that has come in by email, by phone calls, and by way of public comment. But I also do want to remind everybody, this came up in August. This isn't something that's moving at lightning speed. This was first talked about in this board in August. We are now here in November.
But it was
and-
voted on as what you want to do without any input.
No, it was voted on to proceed with again, in my second point, a pilot program that's supposed to run through the remainder of this year. There is not a final decision made for the future years.
But there's also no assessment plan in terms of how to assess a pilot, which that's important.
Well, we do
can't
have.
just take the officers
there is an assessment plan, and the final point I'm going to make, so we can move on to other public commenters, is, as we've already said, you are referencing documents that are models and their resources. Many of the items that you brought up have been specifically addressed, but in a draft form, until it's final, you won't have an opportunity to see that, but you will. You will have an opportunity.
I hope you understand my concern. Those comments, nobody's adjust the fact that board members, when making that decision to proceed with the pilot, specifically asked, are there any negatives we should consider? And we're told no. It's hard for me to trust the competency of people doing research if they can sit there and tell people no.
But just to correct another statement, I was at that meeting too, and I was also asked whether or not there was any liabilities, and I clearly stated that anytime you bring in outside contractors or outside individuals that aren't our trained staff members, there are additional concerns, which I have been working with the administration on to make sure training, the right people, selection, roles, protocols, all those things that you mentioned
But
will
in
be
the
addressed.
pilot, you're going to be rotating officers in that have no training and that aren't going to have...
That's not true.
You don't know that.
That's what we were told.
At this point, I just wanted to correct some of the information.
They have SRO training. We have officers in the Park Ridge Department that have SRO training.
Niles Police Department.
Niles isn't serving Lincoln.
Niles trained the Park Ridge Police Department.
They've all done the training.
So at this point, I would recommend that we move on to the next public commenter. I thank you for your input, but I was going to wait, but I figured this was a good time
Right,
to...
and I felt the same way too. I jumped at the moment she was here to just address some misconceptions.
And the idea of read, review, and vote, that doesn't happen in one meeting.
Right, it could or it couldn't. We've often had an item on the agenda, and if we don't feel ready, we carry it for another meeting. It will not be ready until January, just based on the timing of the back and forth that it's taken to get various law firms in the same room, those that are working with Niles Police Department, those that are working with the Park Ridge Police Department, those that are working with the district, based on when their city council meetings are, and then the email that I received today from our council from Hodges. And I'll just jump ahead and just continue to roll.
Sure.
And it'll be a shorter appendix item at a later time. She received the feedback, it's gone back and forth through the police departments from Park Ridge, confirmation from the city council, City of Park Ridge attorney, the approval date. It is going to go to city council on December 11th, and then to the city council for approval on December 18th. Well, our meeting's the 11th, so it's not going to happen in December. Our next meeting then is January 22nd. We've yet to get a final copy back from Niles. The attorney has reached out to Niles, and we're still waiting not only on the Niles agreement to come back to us, but the development of the reciprocal reporting agreement. So that is still in the works. We're hoping to have everything ready on January 22nd, but again, we're dealing with 3 different governing bodies, 3 different sets of attorneys. It's not a quick process, as Dr. Borelli said.
So Niles doesn't even have this on the calendar yet.
Correct. To my knowledge, we have, maybe they do, and we just haven't heard back from the attorneys, but you're nodding your head that you maybe know for sure, but as of 3:53 today, from Carrie at Hodges, I only have dates from Park Ridge, I have nothing from Niles, so our new target, because again, it's moving at this point, this target is January 22nd. But again, we'll see.
For the draft.
For everybody to read it, and you will decide if you're comfortable with it. You can approve it. It'll be read and approval, or it can be discussed and approval, or it can be discussed and approved in February. I'll work with Dr. Borelli, and we'll get our head around how we want to put it on the agenda.
And council, just to be clear, each time it goes to the City of Park Ridge, the City of Niles, it's going to be reviewed in public. Correct. At a public meeting, at least once, if not twice, where public comment's allowed. Correct.
And if I know Park Ridge, nothing gets passed in one meeting, so it's almost always carried over for 2.
The 11th and the 18th, it seems as though they'll do.
Yeah.
We'll see. Okay.
Go ahead. Welcome.
Hi. I think maybe Ginger went a little over time, so I'm just going to go a little bit short. I think it'd be really great if the board would just be super clear. Like, parents are going to have at least 30 to 60 days to review this thing once it's in draft. It sounds like that's...
Mr. Monaco, I'm sorry. It's hard to hear you, so I don't know if it's volume or if we can maybe get them... That might be better. It's hard. I want to make sure it's picked up on the recorder. Yeah, that might be better.
Thanks. I'm just, so it's George Monaco here to talk about the SRO program. I think there is a lot of parents who are concerned about this, as you can tell. There's a lot going on social media. We just had a bunch of parents that met up about this right before this meeting. What we want to know is that we're going to have time to review it. So it's great to hear that as this agreement is drafted, it's going to be shared with parents. And there should just be a real clear communication about that out of the school and out of the board so that we're not losing sleep over it. Because some of us are, because we really care about our kids, and I know you guys care about our kids too. So just give us a chance to look at it so we can make sure that all of our concerns are addressed. Thank you.
Are there any other individuals out there who'd like to make comments?
Hi, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you might want to take that off and talk into
Gosh. Okay, here we go. Hi, thank you for listening to me. My name is Barbara Spiewak. I'm here tonight to bring to the school board's attention, as Mickey had said, about the special needs issue. Okay, I'm here for that. So my son Peter is in 5th grade over at Field School. That is his home school, and the district made the decision for the 5th graders to go to Emerson and Lincoln for next year. The district seemed to make this decision and this policy change without the board's knowledge or input. We've met with the special ed director. As far as we can really tell, there's no data, there's no research to really support this decision. We just do not feel it's appropriate. So for the more touchy-feely side, 5th grade experience will not be experienced at their home school because there's no outdoor education, there's no Camp Duncan, there's no Colonial Days, there's no Field Follies, there's no holiday sing and field days and the 5th grade picture and student council patrol. There's a lot of special things, as we know, that go on with the 5th grade. And Peter and others will not be able to experience that. Peter's social and emotional benefits will be compromised if he has friends there, very special friends since kindergarten. So not interacting with them on a daily basis, routine, will definitely impact him negatively. And research states that this is a component with typical peers. It influences a child's learning and psychological development. The loss of a 5th grade science and social studies PE curriculums are a big concern to us. He would be experiencing other curriculums, I don't know, at the middle school that has yet to be determined. Peter has a right to the same 5th grade experience as his typical peers. So, I'm sorry, I'm asking the board to further investigate this decision, please. Thank you.
Stephanie Murphy. I'm with George and Ginger, but there are a lot of parents that are behind this effort that have been talking a lot about the SR issue and airing kind of their concerns, both support for the program, questions about the program. I'm here as a parent. I'm a 2nd grader at Washington. I don't have a child in middle school, but I eventually will. But I'm also here as a communicator. It's what I do for a living. And I think one of the things that I've observed with this particular issue is that there does seem to be...
I'm sorry, I lost you at support of the program, and then you said something else, because I couldn't hear you. You're here as not a mom, but something else? A communicator.
Right. So,
thank you. Sorry.
From the perspective of communications, it's been my observation that there appears to be a disconnect between what's happening here, the discussions that are being had, and what parents are hearing. And I think if I'm hearing you correctly tonight, there is a process in place for reviewing the IGA, for collecting parent input, for that review process, the approval process. I just think we're not understanding the rigor that you've put in place I think we trust that there is a rigor in place for that process. We just want to understand it better. I don't know if there's an opportunity for some sort of parent liaison with a program like this where a parent could potentially be involved to help communicate back to the parent community about what's going on. If that's something that would be helpful, I know many parents would love to get involved. I myself would love to get involved. I think what we're looking for is a better understanding of the timeline, the dates that are involved, the time that would be given for review and input, and how the mechanisms for that input will be put into place. How can parents participate? Let's give them enough notice so that they can do their own research, take time to think about it, and provide that input. And I would just reinforce, and this isn't anything that you don't already know, but in today's environment and with the Freedom of Information Act, parents are armed with an awful lot of information. We have some smart parents in the district, but ultimately we're left to interpret what we're receiving, and there are a lot of different interpretations of what we're receiving, and I think we want to understand your perspective and your interpretation of those. So I guess my takeaway for you is that gap in communication, if we can find a way to fill it and ultimately understand the rigor and timeline that you guys have in place for this process, and our role in that would go a really long way, I think, in helping to roll out a program like this that would make parents feel comfortable and ultimately support it, because I think that's what you need for a program like this. Thank you. Thank you.
Any other items or any other thoughts? If there are any other folks, if you can come up to the podium, maybe line up, save some time.
Hi, my name is Amy Brown, and I have 2 daughters at Roosevelt, and I just wanted to bring to your attention, just like Mickey and Barb did as well, regarding the special education program. My biggest concern is, we've worked so hard to try to get the kids integrated into and along with their peers, and it feels like all of our hard work will be just taken away. It's like in their IEPs, we try to get them to be eating lunch with their peers and going on recess and having lunch buddies and doing these different activities. And if they go to the middle school without their peers, why would we work that hard? They've been with these kids since kindergarten. So I ask that you also reconsider. Thank you.
Hi, Rebecca Clarkin. I have a student attending Roosevelt. And I really wanted to echo the request of a parent earlier, asking for a identified period of time for parent input on the SRO decision-making process. I haven't heard a clear answer to that request, and so I wanted to ask the board for some feedback on whether or not you intend to provide a clear period of parent input.
We're not prepared to give you an answer right now. We have to discuss it.
And yet you're going to bring it forward and possibly vote on it at the same board meeting when it is first publicly in front of the board?
Again, nobody here stated that tonight. Anything is a possibility, but the board will make a decision. We have to discuss it. We haven't discussed it yet. As far as, we haven't even seen it yet, much less discuss it. So as far as the dates and times, I can tell you that the board will review it. I'm sure we'll have a discussion. I'm positive we'll have a discussion. At that time, we will entertain questions from the audience on it. Whether we vote on it that day or not, I can't tell you right now. It all depends on the complexity of the document and what's involved. And so it may very well be remanded to the meeting following. In most of my 7 years on the board, we have taken many, many items and we have listened to it, digested it, conversed about it, and vote on it at the next meeting.
So
that's usually our practice.
So to the earlier point about communications, what I think many of us as parents are experiencing is a pattern of communication in the district that is one way. And that when parents advocate and ask for the opportunity to have a two-way dialogue. We are told that the board will consider whether or not to allow us to have input, consider whether or not to allow us to be partners in shaping the vision for our children's education. And that's an issue and a challenge in the district that is even more concerning than the SRO program, because it's a pattern that is being replicated on any number of issues in parents' experience, and I don't really understand why.
Okay, as far as the questions that came up regarding special education, I've asked Dr. Heinz to have Jane Boyd discuss this with the board, since it will be regarding specific students. We'll need to do that in closed session so that we can learn more about this particular issue and understand the concerns of the community, as well as concerns of any policies or practices that would be put into place. And that will be forthcoming at our next meeting. All right. And you'll also forward to the board perhaps some information in your Friday memos so that we'll have a heads up prior to that actual discussion. Okay, thank you. Any other comments by folks in the audience? Not hearing or seeing any, we'll move right along to the first item on our agenda, which is the tax levy rescheduling of the public hearing to December 11th, 2017, and continued discussion of Cook County's lost in cost factors. To frame the conversation, I have a few statements. As a continuation from our last meeting, further evaluation of the levy and its processes, along with a further discussion on the loss and cost aspect of our levy, all of which is open community education on this important issue, and a prelude to the public hearing and voting on the levy at our next meeting. To frame this discussion, and after review of the 1.5-hour discussion on this issue from our last meeting, this is what we heard. We heard our CSBO, Ms. Kolstad, discuss and summarize the entire levy process. Regarding the issue of loss and cost, the loss and cost funding is automatically applied by the county unless we locally decline to have this funding. The funding is to make up for those individuals who do not pay their taxes. As the county collects less than 100% of taxes, yes, there are some folks who do not pay their taxes. It distributes, therefore, the county distributes less than 100% to its constituents, of which District 64 is one. The application of loss and cost funding is a way for the county to help local governing bodies fill in the gap between what is expected at 100% payment and what is actually received. However, while this can occur in each separate fund of the levy, it will only actually occur in those funds that have no PTEL cap or who have a levy that is under the PTEL cap. Presently, the district has 9 funds in our levy. 8 of those funds, education, operations, transportation, IMRF, Social Security, liability insurance, special education, and working cash, are operational funds that are capped by the PTEL rate limiting law to increases of CPI or less. 3% loss and cost fees can be assigned by the county to the cap funds, but only to the limit of PTEL. As our proposed levy is greater than PTEL, even with less than 100% tax payments, there is no shortfall, and there will not be any application of loss and cost. Therefore, as an aside, one could justify having a levy request greater than the PTEL mandated CPI, as not only will it help capture new construction, but also spare local taxpayers of being responsible for any county-imposed loss and cost fees. The 9th and final fund, Debit Service Fund, is uncapped and outside of the operational funds. The combination of the operational levy and the debt service fund equals the total tax levy. The debt service fund will have lost and cost funding of 5% applied to it automatically by the county unless the district files a resolution declining the lost and cost funding. We currently know the exact amount of the bond payment, and this exact amount is advertised as required by law as a request for that fund. found in the required advertising only the exact amount of the bond payment and no loss in cost have been applied. As this fund is not capped, should we ask for the exact amount that is required to make the bond payment and less than 100% of county taxpayers make their payments, the district will receive less than needed to make the payment. The difference in cost must come from operational funds and serves as a special tax hit to our local community. On another way, money will be diverted from the operations of the district, namely education, and towards debt payment. If we allow the county to apply the 5% lost in cost, then the district will receive about $130,000 from other people's money from around the county to make up any difference between the amount of 100% tax payments and the reality of less than 100% of tax payments. The scenario changes with different percentages of taxpayer payments, such as if 95% of the county pays their taxes, we get 5% loss in cost, and it's a wash. If 99% pay taxes, district will in effect appreciate a gain. However, one final twist of the worm, when county taxpayers appeal their taxes, there's a holdback on payments to the district, so that 5% is used to offset the reimbursed payments, and the 5% turns out not to be 5%. So the questions are, can the extra lost in cost income applied to the debt service fund be moved to an operational funding and serve as a method to circumvent the PTEL law? Number two, can the lost in cost based on a historic tax payment level of $98.99 be reduced from 5% to something less so as to guarantee the full county bond payment to the district, sparing the local community from making up any shortfall, even though the payment amounts will not be known for some time, while also being fair and true to other taxpayers and not asking for more than what we should receive. To help provide answers, I gotta get my thing here, we have tonight James Levy from Hodges et al., who will try to clarify these points. Welcome.
Thank you.
Go ahead, James.
Okay, so tonight, am I on? Tonight before the board is a resolution that is in draft form that is abating 100% of the loss and costs that would be added to each and every fund. So again, as was stated by Board Member Borelli, that would be the 3% that are added to the operational funds would be abated, so you would not have that, let's say, 103%, as well as for the bond and interest funds, your limited bonds, your building bonds, that 5% would also not be added. So that would be, you'd be levying at the 100% level. You have discretion to go anywhere from 100 up to the 103 or 105, depending on what the particular funds are. So should you choose to not add loss and cost to any of your funds, you can adopt the resolution tonight or at the night that the levy is adopted in December 11th. If you want to modify that in some way, you can do that as well.
So one of the questions that arose that we weren't really clear on was when folks in town appeal their tax bill, and let's say they're successful in that, we're under the impression in the conversation from last meeting that potentially you could collect within that single year less money than what you had anticipated because so many people appealed their bill in that particular calendar year. My understanding, and tell me if I'm wrong from my past 8 years on a other public body in this town, is that the county's going to get what the county's going to get. If the number is $1 million, let's just say, is what the county's going to take, it doesn't matter who's appealed, because if Sally over here appeals her tax bill, Joe across the street gets part of Sally's tax bill that she was given back as a part of her appeal in that calendar year somehow. So, or it's spread out amongst the entire population in that taxing district. So at the end of the day, the school district, the city, the park district, library fund, whatever it is, collects the same amount of money they were going to collect, except for those with, deadbeats, the ones that don't actually pay their tax bill. And so whatever that 98%, 99% number is, that's the part that really truly doesn't get collected, and that's the purpose of loss and cost.
Right, so the purpose of the loss and cost is to address the folks that are not paying their property taxes. The issue with relation to property tax appeals, where folks are appealing their assessed value, is a separate and distinct issue. Okay.
Right, loss and cost is only to address the 1%, 2%, 3% of folks who aren't paying their tax bill, period.
Correct. That's the purpose of the loss and cost. Now, as you said, if you go over and you're at the higher rates, you have that extra money that can help offset those costs you may have from refunds down the road. But you're correct. The purpose of loss and cost is not to address that type of a refund. That's a separate and distinct issue.
Right. Okay, so can you explain to us, just walk us through the process. So if, whatever let's just say it's $100 million collected in Park Ridge, and of that, a handful of people appeal their tax bill, and as a result of that, these 27 people, their tax bill was reduced by, in the aggregate, $200,000, let's say.
So
where does that 200 grand go?
So it's a little different. If we're talking about property tax appeals, if a homeowner, for example, thinks their home is overassessed, you file a complaint with the Cook County Board of Review saying my home is overassessed and the market value should be X, you have it at Y. That complaint is filed and you file it in the current year of your taxes. That'll go through the Board of Review. If there's a reduction in that review, in that value is not appealed up to the next level, and we're within the same tax year, actually that one taxpayer can see a reduction in his or her tax bill, but because you're capped, a minuscule amount of reduction in EAV there, you'll see a minuscule increase in your limiting rate to offset your tax revenue coming in, okay? So you don't see it if it's settled within the current year. So for example, in 2017, if someone has appealed the property taxes in this year and they've settled that matter for the Cook County Board of Review and a little bit into 18, and it doesn't go any further, there's no net loss to you as the district or any other taxing body. If it gets appealed beyond that, there's a dispute. I'm not happy with whatever that result is as a taxpayer, and now I appeal to the Property Tax Appeal Board. Okay? I've paid my taxes for 2017. It's going to take a while for that to get heard. In the future, if I prevail and I should have had a lower assessed value, just me will get a refund of taxes based on that, and it'll be withheld from a future levy distribution to your district. So that's how the property tax appeal process would occur.
And what fund would that come out of? If it's being withheld, that means that we'd have some less monies in one particular fund. What fund would that be?
It's generally because you don't get a distribution on a per fund basis from Cook County. You just get money and then you allocate it. It's basically it's distributed equally. It's not withheld like, for example, your ed fund doesn't get $100,000. It's just that distribution that you get, then you allocate amongst your particular funds based on what your levy is for that particular year. So you can allocate it as needed.
Does the debt fund payment come from the county in the same check that the operational funds?
They do, Tony, is so if it was say your levy is $100, and then their refund from 2005 is $10. So now we're going to get 90. When we do the tax levy, I determine the percentages, and you guys vote on it for each fund based on the needs of that fund for expenditures in the next 2 years. So they take those percentages. You may have like 46 in the ed fund, 9 in O&M, and then they take that $90, and based on that, it adds up to 100%, how that's split between all of the funds, including debt service.
So if there was the 5% loss and cost applied to debt service fund, and we captured that money, if there was appeals, arguably any leftover money, let's say we're at 102% collection on debt service fund because the loss and cost added more than what we failed to receive, right? So that 2%, arguably, since it's all kind of mixed and matched, it could recover if they're going to hold back some monies to the district because of refunds. That could cover the refunds.
Yes, it could. Yes.
But okay, so maybe this is a more basic question that I'm not comprehending here, but in a given year, if we're due to collect $75 million, I'm just making a number up, $75 million or $100 million in tax revenue, There's a percentage of that that's, again, the folks that aren't paying their tax bill. So let's say for argument's sake, that's 2%. Are we saying then that in any given year, and I guess this is more of a question for Luann, but you can answer it as well too, in any given year, is there more than that 2% that we're not collecting? And that's because of appeals.
Right, so it's, remember, they can go back 20 years.
Right.
So when you look at the collection sheet, and I can bring you guys the collection sheet from the Cook County, it's the distributed taxes, right, the amount that was distributed, then they deduct PTAB objections and refunds that occurred post, prior. They deduct that, and then that's the money that is allocated out to the district.
Okay, so the numbers, but the numbers you gave us at our last meeting, again, and I don't have them in front of me right now, but they were on average 97%, 98%.
Right, once on average.
So again, I'm assuming that those numbers are all in. They're the people who didn't pay their tax bills, they're the several moving parts of all the different appeals that went on. Bottom line is, in 2016, we collected 98.4% of what we expected to collect. I'm making a number up right now. So if we were to adjust our loss and cost based on that, I'll give you that we're losing money other than just people who aren't paying their tax bill. We're losing money because of these variables with the adjustments. We're still way over that number. We were nowhere near 5% in any one of those given years. We weren't even in the ballpark of it. We were at about 2% at most. So I still am failing to understand what the harm is in adjusting our loss and cost to a trailing 5, 6, 7, 10-year average of that number, whatever we say that number is, and we average it out.
So Rick, that's a great question. What is the all-in number? Basically, from a historical perspective, are we running 2 to 3% all in, meaning refunds, all that stuff, plus the folks who don't pay their taxes? What would be the all-in number?
I had that last week, it was like 98-point-something% over a 10-year average.
That chart that we had at the last meeting had it broken down year to year.
So like 1.5%, basically.
Yeah, and I did also talk to Aris Dalianis, who does our tax rate objections for us, and actually Jim had suggested that I talk to him. And his comment was that the loss and costs really is say if we had new property, I had estimated 10 million, okay, and we get 50 million. He looks at that as helping to capture the money for that new construction that maybe we didn't estimate. He said that many districts that issue this document, the resolution, typically don't do zero, they do some percentage. So as Rick is saying, if we could tie it to something, we could tie it to 100 minus the 98 point whatever for that going forward. So ours basically said that it's an insurance policy to make sure you capture your new property.
Yeah, but doing it that way won't do that. I mean, what I'm hearing you say is it's the overage above and beyond what we're truly losing. If again, for argument's sake, if we actually captured 98%, but we're taking 5%, so that extra 3% helps us cover the maybe fudge gap that we had with not catching the new property tax, which, again, that's a different philosophical discussion as to why you're using loss and cost to adjust for something you screwed up on. I'm not saying you screwed up on, but that's not what loss and cost is for. Loss and cost is for objections and people who didn't pay their taxes.
Right, but what if in 1 year, though, like all sorts of people appeal and all sorts of people don't pay their taxes, and we come in only pulling 95% instead of our average 98.
Well, but that's why you look back 10 years. That's why you could look back 5 years, whatever. So you're taking a much bigger chunk of time.
But it could happen at any time, though, right?
It could, but there's also years where it was only 1.2% and we're taking 2.
But isn't though where
if we're averaging it out?
Maybe I misunderstood this. Was we only take what we're short on?
So I also talked to Tanya.
Wait, just so Eastman has an understanding. The county automatically adds that 5%.
Did you bring the sheets with you?
So we automatically get that 5%, not just what we're short. We get 5%. So if we get 98%, we wind up with 103. not 105, because 2 is used for the makeup, and we wound up with 3% overage. So the question comes into, is it truly 3% overage, or is it that 3% covering other shortfalls? That's what we're trying to figure out right now.
So it's earmarked correctly.
Yeah, but the point you're making, and I did mention it last time, you don't know until you're in the year. Because what you're doing, you're basing it off of history, which is probably all you can look at, right? And you're looking at a consistent percentage. I think what Eastman is saying is, in the year that it doesn't match in the prior 10 years, and you haven't applied the correct factor, you could be short.
Yes. Right.
And just so you know what was handed out to you, so everybody can understand, this is the 2016 tax rate report from Cook County for your school district. And it does show your funds, real quickly, on the left side there by name. It'll have the amount that was levied. That was the request by the school district. So let's just pick one, IMRF, for example. That's the $875,000. And then below it is the loss and cost factor. That's that 3%. And if you look, 3% is down the column except for 3 spots. You have your building bonds, 5%. You didn't levy for life safety, but you see a 5 there. And then your limited bonds, that's the 5%. So every one of those operating funds, currently Cook County across the board, you're no different than anyone else, gives 3% on top of those funds, and that's 5% on your bond funds. That's the standard that they do as a matter of course.
So when James and I were talking earlier today about this, kind of talking how to explain it, so if we take the 3% off, right? So let's say we took the 3% off. So let's just look at IMRF. So we had asked for $875. The county added $26,250. So the levy that we actually received was the $901,250. If we take the 3% off, right, we're going to get that $875. But the adjustment over here in the education fund, that reduced by levy amount, then that number is going to go down by $26,250.
But we're not proposing taking 3 off. We're proposing just taking something short of 3.
Correct, but the thing is even if, I wouldn't be afraid to do 0. We're still going to get the money we're entitled to.
Right.
So, but just to be safe,
because of the cap, in the capped funds. Yeah.
That she would look at maybe doing 1.5 this year.
Right. But, I mean, what would be the harm in simply doing whatever we, if we're going to track across the board, regardless of whether it's a capped or not? It's irrelevant, right? For 9 or 8 of the 9 funds, it's irrelevant. But
It's
at least
for the cap funds.
The cap funds, right. But at least we're being consistent. We're saying across the board, we're doing the same thing.
Well, it's nice to tie a number to
Right,
something.
that it's based in reality. It's based at least on past history of what we've seen the district. Again, and to use an absurd example, Eastman, though, it would be like, going to your boss and saying, well, I really need 103% of my salary this year, because in the event that next year cost of living actually goes up by 4% instead of 1.7, you're going to cover me. Like, that's not how it works. I mean, we're trying to be fair here to the taxpayers and say, okay, we're going to look at past history, and sometimes it's going to come out where the district's going to come out a little bit ahead, sometimes the taxpayer's going to come out a little bit ahead, but in the wash, it evens itself out.
I'd also be interested, though, in seeing that if we are going to look at a 10-year average, I'd also be interested in seeing the high and low. Like, I mean, it's fine to come up with a 2% short average. Right. But if one year it was 1 and one year all of a sudden it's 4 or 5, and then a couple years are 1 and 2, it's still going to come to an average of 2. But if you're spiking on that year, it's a 4 or 5% short, and you're short, we're going to be short forever, I bet.
And maybe you could best speak to this based on your background, whether we use the average or the median, or the mean of this.
I mean, that high and low is almost
actually you need
just as that high and low is just as important as seeing just the average also.
So our low was in 2007, just looking back at that 10-year, this is from last board meeting, 97.35. Not looking at 2015 because we haven't seen all of the objections come in. Our high looks like 98.99 and 14. Realizing that these 2006, I mean, the farther you go back, right, it's potentially going to be lower because as additional objections have come in over the 20 years, if you can imagine.
But these, again, are your all-in numbers, right? These include non-paid taxes and objections. The whole,
Oh, yeah, this is
package.
kind of all in. So if you were going to look at that as a way to tie it to a number, right?
So worst, we've been short about 3% in our worst year.
Yeah, not even that, but at your worst year, yes.
So
that would be
it sounds like it's between 2 and 3% when it's all in.
Yeah, and so then if we tie it, if we said, well, the average this year that we have right now is 98.33, then it would be 1.67, right?
But we don't we don't know the numbers. You're procrastinating, and it could be much lower. It could be a whole 1.5 lower. Yeah, we don't know the numbers.
The thing of it is that, you know, it's like the county clerk, she told me loss and collection is added in prior to the statutorily required reductions. And so we went through the exercise at our last meeting, and when we look at the agency tax rate report, you can see under PTEL reduced levy, they took that $44,770,570 reduction all in the ad fund, so that we only get what we're legally entitled to, which is our limiting rate up here, right, 3.861, and it ties out over here, 3.861. So if we make the adjustment, as Rick is saying, and look at like 1.67 for the 17, and then we see what it looks like last year, we're not going to lose money in our operating funds. We're only going to lose, and correct me if I'm wrong, a very small amount in debt service. But for right now in debt service, we're fine with that.
You know, what is involved? Since we're dealing with the unknown, what is involved? You know, if it's kind of like when I go home and I get hungry and I take a big piece of chocolate cake and I realize I can't eat all that cake. I put some back. So what is the process involved if we were to take this 5% in the debt service fund, and we go through the year and we know what our numbers are, and we know what our overage is? Tony, what is the? What is the term applied to?
You'd be abating your levy subsequent to the adoption.
Abatement of the levy. Thank you.
Right.
What is involved in abatement of the levy? Because now you're dealing with a known number.
Right. So districts sometimes, and this is what 207 does, I believe, is they abate their debt service levy.
Yeah.
Right. So we could look at doing that some year, but we right now have that $2 million that's in there figured into the financial framework for the construction.
Yeah.
So Elizabeth will be coming to talk in January with the board about like kind of next steps with our financial framework, and to bring the new board members up to date on, you know, our debt service and everything, so they hear it from her.
But what's that got to do with the abatement?
So if you decided you were going to abate the levy for the debt service, right, and not charge the taxpayers for it, then we're going to have to rethink how we're going to do construction beyond next summer. Because that money
why can't we use the $2 million as earmarked for construction and abate monies outside of that or beyond that?
You only have $2 million in there. We have about $2 million in that fund, I believe.
No. The abatement would be the levy for 17, and then once the numbers for 17 come in, then we'll know what our debt service fund requirement was, what that 5% looked like, and what the overage is, and then just rebate or refund, whatever the term is.
You mean like 100 and some thousand?
Whatever it is.
I don't know. I've never actually done one.
Well, you just pass a resolution abating a portion of your levy, and then you file it with the clerk, and the clerk will stop the extension as it goes through. You know, you get two major payments that go through. The issue is going to be you're always in arrears. So unless you have a sufficient fund in advance, or you're getting sources from somewhere else, if you're going to abate, and whatever the fund may be, it doesn't have to be that service, whatever levy you want to abate, you're cutting it off in that tax year, if that makes sense. Because you're not going to know 17 how much you get until 18 and beyond.
But that's okay. In 18, you can rebate 17 because you have no numbers.
Well, you wouldn't be abating, since 17 is When you abate the current levy. You would just be you'd be reducing whatever you're at currently.
But
It's the same
in 18,
concept.
you can abate whatever 17 was overage.
Right,
So
you could pick whatever
pick a
amount
number.
you
It's all numbers. Just pick a
Depending
number.
on where you're at, yes.
Yeah, just pick a number. So it doesn't matter. So you're always in arrears. So 7 to 18, you would abate 17. 19, you would abate 18. That way you have your full funding. You're not going to have an underage. And this whole conversation is a moot point. So if you have an overage and we don't deserve the overage, give it back. It seems to me the way to go, because you're dealing with a known entity, a known amount. You know exactly what your overage is. We're not supposed to get it. Give it back. And it obviates the $2 million. The $2 million's in the account. Use it for new construction. You don't want to rebate that, because then we have to go back to the community and get more money for more construction. We have it, use it, and we rebate or abate, whatever the term is, to the folks. What do you all feel about that?
Just so you know, like your 17 levy, you'll be collecting it through all of 18. So you'll be, in December of 18, you'll still be getting money for your 17 levy, because people will pay their tax. You know, your 2 payments that you're supposed to make, right? Yeah. Folks don't pay on time, but they will pay. So the 17 won't be fully funded. It may not even be fully funded until the next year. So I just don't want you to think that those numbers are going to be exact, and I'm sure you do.
So we can carry it forward, though.
Correct.
So we can actually retroactive go back to 16 or 17 and start and say, okay, since 16's closed, we know if we took too much, we can abate that now, and then next year we can abate 17, which will be closed.
Yeah, you could try and quote unquote.
So this is I hear it as an option, other than what I was asking for of not taking it at all. I think it's a great option. I don't think it's a bad option. I think it gets done what we asked to get done. We're not keeping money we don't feel we are entitled to, and we're giving it back. Yet we are protecting ourselves from that small, from what I understand, that small possibility that we may not take some money that we eventually would have needed. Am I correct? Am I correct when I say that?
So we could look at what we collect, but like James said, we will not have collected all of 17 when you're voting on the 18 tax levy still. So we're not even going to know.
Which is why I'm saying if we do 16 now, then we already know what 16 is, and there's not going to be any other anything more coming in, because those have already been paid and done. And then next year we do 17, which will be 18, so that'll be, or I'm sorry, next year will be 18, and it'll be at the end, so that 17 will be done. And then we're on the Cook County year arrear tax.
You're just using
schedule.
the current levy to pay the previous is what you'd be doing.
So we could take what we collected that year versus the payment we had to make.
So before I weigh in on how I feel about that, if we do it the other way, the way we discussed at the last meeting, what would be the potential negative of picking a number that is a historic number past 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years and just taking that levy, avoiding having to do all this giving back? What would be the potential negative to the taxpayers?
Excluding the bond funds, most likely the effect is going to be zero, actually. You could, because of the way that limiting rate works and the amount of money that you need to levy to fund your school, you're over what the limiting rate asks for. So, for example, in 16, I backed out 100% of your loss and costs and all your operating funds, and you were still over on your levy request, still over the maximum amount that was permitted under your limiting rate. So the total funds that you receive is still going to be the exact same. Where they end up and how they're allocated per fund is just different. Okay? So, and frankly, I don't see that changing, that you're ever going to be under your limiting rate. So by asking for less, the impact really is not going to be that great. It will be the greatest, or will be real, in your bond funds, because that is money you get outside the cap. So you are getting, for example, in 16, that was $139,604. That was real money that you got for the 5% that was added on. If you go to zero, that money is gone. And then, as Luann said, then that's the issue of, do you have the sufficient funds or sufficient balance? Are you comfortable to have if you do have a shortfall in actual collections in that particular year? So that would be the downside.
So I can understand, in the bond fund category, we would lose a certain amount of money by not taking
the full 5%.
Correct. And the reason for us to continue to want to add money to the bond fund category would be if that bond fund was at zero, or at what point do we want to keep building that bond fund?
Well, that's a business decision. You know, again, it's the 5% added to offset the reduction. If you're at 98%, then you have a 3% gain. And I think it was Trustee Sue said, you know, the fluctuations in year to year is one you're going to go. It doesn't look historically that you're going to drop below 5, but if you do drop below that 5%, you'd have built up some reserve on it. So that's really what you're looking for.
What would be the business decision, in your opinion, for us to continue to build on top of the $2-some million that we have in that bond fund?
I don't think you need to, because, not right now, because we have the money. If we didn't have enough collection, right, we would have the money to make the payment. We are planning, we had talked about anyway, with the prior board, of using that money for the correct construction financial framework, that $2 million. Now, if we zero that bank account out, right, that fund, we zero it out, and then if we had bond payments, and say the bond payment was $3 million, and we collected $2.8 million, we're going to have to issue, I believe it's a supplemental levy, or take it out of the operating funds, right?
If you wanted to...
So if we say it was zero, and then our bond payment's $3 million, the county clerk extends for $3 million, but we only get 2.8. We have to get other 200,000.
Yeah, to the extent you would be, you're permitted, right, you could do a supplemental levy and file that.
Right, or take it out of your operating funds.
Right, and do a transfer.
So we'd be able to transfer the money from the operating funds over.
To pay the debt payment.
To pay the debt payment.
Right.
And it's a hit on the education.
Right. So then, right. So I know this is exact opposite of what I was asking last time. However, should we not be continually adding to the bond fund? Should we be adding to it as much as we can? Is that fiscally more responsible than not adding to it if it's unnecessary?
I don't think you should. I mean, this is where you can get tax objections too, right? You have money sitting in that fund. Why are you levying for that fund? You can get tax objections.
Yeah, so just to be real clear on this, there's two types. We were talking earlier about property assessment complaints. That's my house is valued at $500,000, but it's only worth $3. That's an assessment complaint. There's another type of complaints that deal with exactly what we're talking about here. Those called our tax rate objections, and those are filed in Cook County Circuit Court. And what Luann's talking about, usually loss and cost won't kick you to this level, but there's a claim that taxpayers make called an excess accumulation claim. It says, you school district have so much money in this particular fund, transportation, for example. The formula is if you have 2 times the average annual expenditure out of that fund for the prior 3 years, the presumption is you have an excess accumulation unless you can articulate a valid reason as to why you're accumulating. We're going to buy buses. Okay? So if you do start to accumulate, you will see that type of objection. You do see objections, tax rate objections, for this very issue we're talking about tonight, loss and cost. You will see them, they come in and they say, we see this a lot on the North Shore, for example. Winnetka, I mean, you folks as well, you get 99.5% of your taxes coming in, and they file an objection saying, that is an excessive loss and cost. So that is something to keep in mind.
So I'm glad for that, because it even helped clarify my own opinion. So now that I know it, I would say go down to zero if you wanted, take the $2 million out, apply it to your capital funding for your fixing up, but I think we should have a much smaller amount in the debt service fund to cover the ebbs and flows, but maybe it's only $250,000, and you never go above that amount, and if you go above that amount, you give rebates. and you give the money back. And that way you have just enough to cover any ebbs and flows. You accept the 5%, and then you give rebates or abatements, or I can't get the word right, but whatever it is.
Right.
Yeah.
So if that's the way we go, which I don't have a problem with, can we get to a point at which the board sets a policy?
Yeah, well,
That's just
policy or practice?
Yeah. Just something so that it's consistent going forward. That I understand that at any given time, a future board could say, no, we're going to change it and go this way. I get that. But just so that it's not a year-to-year discussion every time we're having this conversation, but that as a policy, the board believes X, we should do this, we shouldn't take more than we need to operators, and lay it out that way. And this is how we go about doing it.
Yeah, and if I could state it so that we all can understand it for once here, is that the 3% applied by the county to capped funds, and we've heard from several individuals here, it's a wash. Because we're only going to get up to PTEL funding anyway. On the debt service fund, we have a 5% automatically applied. And historically, we've taken that 5% and we've accumulated some overage here. That overage is not going to waste. We're not having a party with it. It's going to fix some roofs, and it's going to fix some doors, and it's going to fix some asbestos abatement. That's what it's going to fix. But going forward, we will continue to take that 5% until we hit a ceiling of $250,000, which should be enough based on what I've heard to cover any ebbs and flows. If the amounts ever exceed $250,000, we talk about abatements and giving that money back because we don't need it, and we shouldn't be building up that fund with money to fix our buildings anyway. That's really not what it's for.
Why they built it up, who knows?
Who knows? Who knows? That you inherited it, and we're going to put it to good use, but still, that's not what it's for. So that's my proposal. And I would suggest that we maintain that 5%, because if we're going to use that $2 million pretty lickety-split here over next summer, that's off the boards, that's out. So I would say maintain the 5% until we can build up that fund again to that 250 mark, and anything above the 250 mark, we issue abatements. Is that, let's get some consensus on
So, and if there's a consensus, obviously we're not taking action tonight.
No.
But what we would do is it sounds like the option that you're considering is you'd like to see a policy that reflects this philosophy, which then we'd bring back, you guys would consider, discuss further, and then potentially adopt.
Well, that was the part two. Is this going to be a practice of the district, or is this going to be policy? And I don't know how to make that a policy, because it's more of a business thing.
Well, but it's like a lot of things that we do, right? We look to board policy and what parameters you have set for us, and that's where we work within. And so if it's, I kind of like policy myself.
What do you suggest?
No, I agree. It's kind of like the policy that you have, which sets your reserves.
Correct.
Right? You have a range, and when we get to this range, this is going to trigger us to consider this issue and potentially abate on a future year.
Well, that's true. We do have a policy 120 days. So if that's the case, then we have a policy committee. Does it need to go to our policy committee?
What will happen is we will craft language. I will check the tape to make sure I've captured all the nuances.
Or you call me.
Check the tape, page 27, I wrote right here. And then we'll put a policy in place that captures it, and we can do one of two things. We can bring it through first read, or we can just bring it to the board to say, does this reflect your desires? And then
First, before we do that, let's go around and
Can I get a clarification? Can I just one clarification before we go around? You're proposing that we, for this year, take the 5?
Yes.
Don't give anything back for 16?
No.
So it wasn't the first proposal of give back now. Clarify it for me if you don't mind, because from what I understood, we were going to, one was either just take the less amount and roll the dice on it, or then you came in and said, why don't we just take it and give it back?
Yes, but I also listened to the last couple of statements, which kind of polished up my thought process.
Okay.
So I believe at this point, our $2 million that we have in the fund, that is overage, that is going to be wiped clean. That's a wipe account, because that $2 million, excuse me, that $2 million is going to help fund next summer's work. So our overage in that fund will be 0. We now need to build up that fund, because if there's, excuse me, if there is any dips in that fund, we may not be able to cover that fund. So I'm proposing maintain a little bit of extra juice inside that fund to cover the ups and downs, but if you get over a certain point, then you issue a rebate.
So, have we already, in our budget, allocated that $2.5 million in that fund?
No, it's
to pay for summer projects?
No, that, when we had talked about the construction financial framework last spring, that was within the framework for the 1920 construction.
So we weren't using this money to do that anyway?
Not this summer, no.
So
You could, though. You could.
May I propose we only move across $2 million? You want to keep $500,000 in that account, you said, or $250,000?
$250,000.
Okay, so why don't we leave?
Yeah, we could do
why don't we leave the $250,000 in now, push out the whatever the rest is, so that we don't have to levy again. Or we could start the process this year as opposed to next year.
Yeah, the only problem with that is we need the $2 million for construction.
Well, that's what I asked.
But we need that $2 million is calculated.
So what I could have Elizabeth do, 'cause she'll be coming in January, is I'll look at, I don't know what the balance is in the account right now, but I could say, if we could potentially leave 250 in there. But let's see what we have.
Before we go there, let me start with Eastman. I guess there's two thoughts here. We can leave some of the existing $2 million in there to fund that account, and we can do our rebating immediately, or take the whole $2 million for construction and rebate down the road when we build up the account again. Do it now or do it later, basically. Take the full $2 million out or leave some of it in. She has already calculated that $2 million for construction, at least down the road.
Right.
So there would have to be recalculation of construction.
Oh, so I misunderstood.
And if we were to give it back, we wouldn't even give it, it's not like giving it back next week. We'd be giving it back a year from now anyway.
Right.
Then we may as well use it now than give it back in the future.
Right.
That's my thought.
Yeah, I too say take the entire $2 million.
Yeah. Rick?
Yeah, I think that's the right approach.
Yeah, I'm going to take the $2 million as well.
I propose to leave the $250,000 in the account now and start rebating sooner rather than later.
Guys?
Take the 2. I'd like to leave the 250 in.
All right, well, we have 5-2. The consensus is to move the 2 and start building up the fund and offer rebates or abatements once we hit the 250 mark. Very good. Thank you for your time.
No
So
problem.
what about the operating funds? Are we going to do zero?
Operating funds don't make a difference.
No, so.
Leave it alone. Leave them alone.
Right, so okay. So
we just changed the resolution to be just the operating funds?
Well, no, we don't.
it sounds like you're not doing anything this year.
We're leaving everything as is.
Right.
Because we're going to abate on the back end.
For the debt. But if you wanted it to show zero.
But if it's a philosophical difference.
Right.
Either we change the numbers or we abate, but.
Right, so you don't need to do, correct, you don't need to do anything then in that resolution.
But our expenses now are pretty high.
So to clarify this aspect of it, instead of us...
Our expenses now are really high.
Rick, to clarify this, instead of us reducing that number for the operating fund side, we're not going to reduce the number. We're going to continue to take the full 5 because we probably won't get it. We're not going to get it anyway.
3.
Or 3, I'm sorry. And, and if it does for some reason yield us any additional funds and we don't need them, we'll give it back.
But you can't because it's PTEL.
Okay, so there's nothing to do there.
No.
Right. Okay, gotcha.
Right, and then going forward, if you build up the bond and interest to a point where you're comfortable, you can do 100% rather than 105 in the future. Correct. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Have a good evening, everybody.
Just really quick, James also did help me with the FGM settlement we'll be talking about a little later tonight.
Do you want
Do you want to do that right now?
Do you guys want to do that right now in case you have a question?
As long as you're here, and if it's okay with the board, how about if we move the approval of settlement agreement with FGM Architects up and our long-anticipated Dr. Lopez discussion will have to slide back for a little bit.
I don't think this will take too long. This should go pretty fast.
So beginning on page 62 with an action item on page 63, FGM Associates and its rain garden solution come up for discussion.
So this goes back to summer 2016 construction. We were attempting to reduce the rainwater issues at Lincoln Middle School on Crescent Avenue there at the entrance that is south of what is now our new entrance. At that time, one of the options that was recommended or we asked about was putting in a rain garden. We had looked at working with the city of Park Ridge on how we could do detention and different things, and we couldn't come to an agreement on how quickly the water could be released out into the sewer system. So we looked at trying to help reduce it using this rain garden. At that year, we also were doing construction in that area on the sidewalks and that, and so we did the rain garden at the same time. As you read in the letter from FGM, that the rain garden was not a proper solution there, and basically it turned into a mud hole. And so we have been asking for the last over a year for FGM and Nicholas to come up with a solution and an agreement, because there was a lot of finger pointing about whose fault it was. So after that time period, FGM has taken full responsibility. Nicholas and Associates calculated out the amount of expenditures at $28,000 that were incurred for the rain garden project. So what we are recommending and FGM has asked is that we would accept $28,000 from them to cover the rain garden. That rain garden was removed this summer when we removed that sidewalk, so we removed an additional impervious surface. So we're going to see kind of a wait and see approach, see how this winter and spring goes to determine what else we have to do with the rain runoff. And then James looked over the agreement with FGM.
Yeah, my memory's not extremely great, but I remember looking at this, and there were just some few tweaks to make sure that it was limited to the rain garden and not to any other or broader scope of a release. So the release was being given for the rain garden in exchange for the payment of the $28,000. Otherwise, it's a pretty straightforward release.
You know, my concern when I read this is the $28,000 reflective of the entire expense of the district. I mean, you had a look at this. I mean, it's more than $28,000.
Right. That I don't know.
Yeah. And you know, if we're going to make an agreement for their mistake, their problems, we need to be made whole, and that's 28 grand ain't going to cover it.
Well, the 28 does cover the installation of the rain garden. I frankly was surprised it was that much.
We pay them architectural fees to design it. We paid legal fees to adjudicate it. It's more than $28,000.
I believe the 28, Ron, included all of the fees that were paid prior.
Does it include time and material that we've done to mitigate the problem in the first place? I mean, if something's collecting, I'm sure you didn't just let it sit there and do nothing, right? I mean, our guys are out there working on it.
No, so we actually, they came that fall of 2016 to work on it. But when we were removing that sidewalk in front of Lincoln, and so when they regraded, they just moved. I mean, there was basically nothing there. They just regraded it.
So how long was it there?
How long was it there?
How long was it there but not operational?
Probably from the beginning.
A couple years?
No, summer 2016.
We had gotten some credits back from Nicholas too, besides the $28,000.
Correct.
All right, so the answer was the architectural fees are rolled into the $28,000 rebate. So the monies that we paid them to design and bid and all the other stuff, that's all rolled into this $28,000 rebate.
Right, and we got additional material fees back from the contractor for any materials that were purchased.
Wouldn't the best way to handle this to just give us a breakdown of what that specific portion of the project cost us all in with materials, labor, architectural fees, cost of this additional review, and then just say, okay, this is what it costs you guys all in. This is what they're willing to settle it for. here's your, here are your two numbers, make your decision if you want to move on with a settlement of $28,000 instead of us going back and forth and trying to figure it out right now.
Well,
just my thought.
Do you have an exact dollar amount that it costs to build a rain garden?
To build the rain garden, I don't know that it would cost this amount of money, but we're including fees also. The materials were about $2,000, Ron?
Well, the plantings were about between $2,000 and $3,000 for the plantings. It was determined that
Move your mic a little closer.
It was determined that the contractor didn't use the correct soil blend, so that was the credit that Nicholas gave back to us for the soil. It really wasn't a very big rain garden, so the cost isn't astronomical. I think the whole rain garden was 25 foot in diameter, maybe.
It was no bigger than this.
So part of the rain garden included the cost for the excavation and things included some concrete work that we did on the side. It included burying a downspout that was flooding into the basement. So that is still there. The downspout is still buried and coming out at that location of the rain garden, that if it becomes a problem, we're already piped that far if we want to put a catch basin there and tie it into the storm sewers. So that part of the project is still functional and working for us. The concrete and the correction to the grading is still there, so it would be hard to break down the exact cost of the rain garden alone, but I'd be hard-pressed to say that it'd be much more than what we're getting back out of it between this and the credit from Nicholas.
So not to belabor this, I mean, in both of your opinions, are we pretty much breaking even at a 28,000 mark?
I am happy with this.
I believe so. We beat them up pretty well on some other points that, because of the rain garden, that we weren't happy about, that we've got some other things settled through Nicholas and the contractor. So I'm pretty happy with the outcome of this.
Okay. Any other comments? Not hearing any. Does anybody want to make a motion?
I do. I move that the Board of Education of Community Consolidated School District 64, Park Ridge, Niles, Illinois, approve the settlement agreement and release with FGM Architects.
Is there a second?
Second.
Rick has a second, starting with Eastman.
Yes.
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 No.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Do you want to, Dr. Hines, jump into...
A3, Dr. Lopez's student.
And then you want to go to the other issue afterwards?
We'll finish the agenda.
Well, do we do it in the middle, or? All right, okay.
Go to A3 and then take a break.
All right.
Bye, everyone. Thank you again.
You bet.
Thank you.
Take care.
We'll be here next.
All right, now we flip back to A3, beginning on page 16. We have an informative presentation of the scholastic achievements of our district. Dr. Lopez. At the conclusion of this, I'll ask everybody what they want to do.
Perfect. This slide presentation is coming around, so you should have a handout soon. But I want to start by thanking the board for the opportunity tonight to share our annual student achievement update. This report actually provides the Board of Education and our community with information about district performance on a number of assessments. Tonight we're going to talk about the MAP assessment, the PARC assessment, and the 5 Essentials survey. But we're also going to share information about the Illinois School Report Card, the Every Student Succeeds Act, and our District 64 balanced scorecard, which is a piece of our 2020 Vision Strategic Plan. I'll start the way I always start our annual presentation, which is by reminding the board and the community that our standardized assessments are only one piece of our district's assessment portfolio. So we also use classroom assessment data and assessments that are common across grade levels to give us information about how students are responding to the curriculum. We'll start tonight by talking a little bit about the MAP assessment. We did share some information about the MAP assessment earlier this fall. And when we shared that information, I talked a little bit about how we can view our performance on the MAP assessment through the lenses of both status and growth. So when we're looking at the assessment data through the lens of status, we're answering the question, how does our students' average score compared to the average score of students in other schools? Generally, what we've said on the MAP assessment is that scores at the 93rd percentile or higher are considered really competitive. Growth, on the other hand, looks at how students' scores change from fall to spring. So growth answers the question, are our students growing more or less than students in other districts? And growth at the 50th percentile is considered typical on the MAP assessment, and anything above the 50th percentile is above average. The benchmark that we've used in our district is that growth at the 60th percentile or above is really exceptional. In a typical district, we would expect to see scores distributed along a typical bell curve, right, with the majority of students performing in the average range. But we know that District 64 is not a typical district. When we analyze our test scores based on national norms, we see that District 64 is a high-performing district. We have more high-performing students in our district than in other districts. Our math and reading scores are really exceptional based on national norms. And as this graph shows, almost half of our District 64 students perform at the 70th percentile or above, and more than 20% of our students actually perform at the 90th percentile or better. So when we think about that through the lens of national norms, as a district we've said, maybe those national norms aren't an appropriate benchmark for our district. So we've worked with NWEA to secure a report that lets us compare our achievement to the achievement of other districts with the same demographics and resources. And that report used to be called the Virtual Comparison Group Report, but NWEA recently changed the name to the Same Schools Report. So they're calling it the Same Schools Report now.
And so they can copyright it.
Right. They stopped letting the researchers name the reports, I guess is what they did. The members of the group that we're compared to are confidential. So we can't know the names of the districts that we're compared to, but they are districts that are in a suburban area and have the same demographics as us. So this then becomes sort of an apples-to-apples comparison.
So these are real schools, not just an aggregate?
Yes, correct. Yes, they're real schools. So rather than using national norms, we can compare our growth to other schools with similar resources, similar student profiles. So when we look at our data compared to the Same Schools Report, we typically use this format. And what we say is basically any score that falls within the range of this yellow box means that our performance is similar to other like districts. And we said when scores fall above this band, it means we're outperforming these similar districts. And when scores fall below this band, it means we're underperforming compared to other districts. So we thought this was a really interesting concept when we launched the strategic plan. And we said we want to set a goal related to this report in the strategic plan, and we want it to be aggressive. And our question was, can our schools grow our students at a rate that's faster than schools that are just like us with the same demographics and resources? So we said we want to outperform in our first year same schools by 0.1. And by the time we get to the end of our strategic plan, we want to be outperforming those schools by 0.5. And we talked with some consultants at NWEA, and we said, is this a reasonable goal? And they said it's aggressive, but it's a reasonable goal, and one of the things that will take you there will be focusing on differentiation of instruction. So last year, or in 2016 rather, we continued to track with other similar districts in the area of reading. And when we analyzed our same schools report this year, once again, we're continuing to track with that same schools group. So we did not achieve our goal this year of outperforming the same schools group. But the good news is we're still tracking with that team of same schools. Again, also in the area of math, while we didn't move to the next level, which was our goal of outperforming same schools by 0.2, we were able to continue outperforming those schools by 0.1. So we continue to outperform those same schools. In reading on the MAP assessment, and we talked about this in the fall, we continue to have high status and above average growth. And we attribute this to our district-wide focus on differentiation and to the strength of our intervention strategies and our K-8 literacy program. In math, we've increased our status score from the 88th percentile to the 90th percentile. And we continue to have above average growth. And again, we attribute this to that differentiation focus and strategies that we're using in our math classes currently, like flexible grouping and co-teaching. So this year, we're actually piloting some math interventions in kindergarten through 5th grade to support students who are struggling in math.
Can I make a comment?
Sure.
So we went up in percentile rank and down in percentile rank for growth.
Mm-hmm. So it likely means that that nationally, other schools went up in their percentile rank too and had the same amount of growth. So there are two different percentile ranks. But I can get that answer for you more specifically, Larry. I can call one of the researchers at NWEA.
Okay, thanks.
But keep in mind that anything above 50%, the 50th percentile in terms of growth, is really significant.
Is it possible that in 2015, in 2016, we had such a jump in growth that then it kind of tapered back off at 2017 because we shot up?
We did shoot up.
Fixed a problem that potentially was here, and then now we're just kind of riding in that we're still growing, but obviously not at that similar to a child who hits his growth spurt and then he goes to the doctor, he's at his 77th percentile in height, and then for the next 2 years, he's 71, 69, and then hits another growth spurt. Is that a possibility as well?
Certainly, certainly. Or it's possible that we grew so much in 2016 that our curriculum didn't catch up yet in 2017.
Are these the same students?
Yes.
Or we sent a group of really bright kids to Maine South.
Yes, and I have more information about that later in my report. So I can share with you where our students are placing at Maine South. But let me talk to somebody at NWA, Larry, and I can get more specifics for you and Tom about the answer to that question.
And if I can jump in, I think the analysis of these numbers is probably more important than just the numbers themselves.
Yes, and the analysis of these numbers actually happens at the level of school and the level of classroom. So at each school, we have quality improvement teams who sort of dissect their school data and then look at the performance of students in individual classrooms and even the performance of students in individual instructional groups. So the MAP data itself can provide us with some general guidelines about supporting students, and then teachers use classroom assessments and their own observation of students' response to instruction to make differences in their instruction.
I know you said that they won't give you the schools that they've used to compare us with. However, they've given you some guidelines of what those schools are. Would they give you the percentile rank and the growth of other schools that you may ask for, or is that like
no, they
proprietary
won't. They'll
information?
only give us the whether we're performing above or below that benchmark group.
So we'd have to rely on a relationship with other schools if we wanted to share that information with them.
If you remember, we tried that. Lauren and I tried that a few years ago, and
they're not
no
so good
takers,
about it.
no bites.
Well, the fact that there's no takers is a positive thing because they might not want to compare themselves to us.
Never know. But one of the other things that we have continued to do at the elementary level is our K-5 math tutoring program, our before and after school program that we're using Title I funds for at some of our schools. And then also, as I mentioned, we're piloting our math interventions. So we can take a closer look at our PARC assessment. As you know, PARC stands for Partnership for Assessment of Readiness in College and Careers. And the PARC is our Illinois state assessment, and it replaced the ISAT 3 years ago. PARC tests are administered in English language arts, in ELA, and in math. And in ELA, students are tested on 2 strands. We look at reading and writing. We look at literary text, informational text, vocabulary, written expression, and conventions. And in math, we've targeted 4 strands. So we look at major content, supporting content, reasoning, and application. So in 2015, the PARC assessment was significantly different than it is now. It was actually administered in 2 windows. There was a window in March and a window at the end of the year. And although the questions were similar in terms of format, the test event itself was very different for students. And so the consortium asked for feedback from local school districts, and we said, this testing is too extended. It's disrupting instruction, right? Where it was a crazy test. And so the response to that was that now we only have 1 testing window. And so when we look at our data, we can look at our 2015 PARC data, but 2016 really formed a new baseline for us in the sense that it was a test that was administered in 1 testing window, similarly to how it was administered this past year in 2017. So in 2017, in English language arts, 58% of our students met or exceeded standards. And this was a slight decrease from the year before, where 59% of our students met or exceeded standards. Generally, when we look at our PARC performance, it's been flat over the last 2 years in ELA. And this information specifically is from our 2017 Illinois School Report Card. And when we look at the individual grade levels, we see an increase at 3rd and 4th grade, and we see a decrease at the other grade levels in English language arts. And at the district level in math, we see this past year that 57% of our students met or exceeded the standards. And again, that's a slight decrease from the prior year, which was at 58%. So again, generally, our PARC performance is also flat in the area of math in these past 2 years where the testing event has been most similar. When we look at individual grade levels in math, we see an increase at the 3rd and 5th grade and a decrease at the other grade levels.
Bless you.
And in general, when we look at our subgroup performance, we see opportunities for us to expand, particularly when we look at supporting our low-income students, our English learners, and our students with an IEP. Every year, we compare our performance to other districts in the North Cook area. So we have identified 5 districts that are part of what we call our comparison group. And they're highlighted on this slide in blue. And we continue to track with 2 districts in this group. We track with Arlington Heights 25 and with Glenview 34. And actually, we slightly outperform both of those districts in math. The highest score in our comparison group is Deerfield 109 with an overall score of 76. And the average overall score of our comparable districts is 64. And our overall score is a 57. So one of the questions that we asked ourselves when we looked at this data and saw that it was flat compared to that 2016 year, our 2017 year, we took a deep dive into the data and said, what's going on? Where are the areas that are strengths for us and where are the areas that are challenges? And so we worked with a team from one of the local regional offices of education to do an audit of our PARC performance. And we looked at 2 years of data, and our goal was to identify small changes in instruction that would bring momentum to our PARC scores, right? Would bring momentum to this achievement. And through that audit, we were really able to identify specific strengths and weaknesses. So we identified specific topics at each grade level for both English, language arts, and math. And these topics were areas of low student performance on the park, and they were things that are directly aligned to our curriculum. So for example, in third grade, one of the goals that we have is for students to compare informational texts on the same topics, right? In middle school, one of the goals that we have is for students to compare information from primary and secondary sources. Well, these are all things that are part of our curriculum. So they're things that we can begin to design instructional activities around that'll slowly move our park scores. So once we had that information about the areas where we're strong and the areas where we're weaker, we pulled together some representatives from our curriculum team to begin to brainstorm how we might make this practical for teachers. So our K-5 curriculum specialists in math and ELA developed a park podcast that was delivered at building meetings to help teachers better understand what the assessment questions look like and think about how we might make connections to the curriculum. And then the K-5 math and ELA curriculum specialists have designed two classes that will happen after Thanksgiving, where teachers can come for professional growth credit to learn more about how to support park and link activities to the curriculum. Myself and our ELA and math department chairpersons hosted a joint department meeting for all of our middle school math and ELA teachers to share the results of our park data and identify opportunities for support. Our social studies and science departments are aware of our park scores in the areas that link directly to informational text, where they can provide some support. And our CFC curriculum specialist has been working with the team to bring momentum to our Channels of Challenge scores. So we've got some solid plans in place for moving forward. One of the other things that we're also doing some brainstorming around is the test environment themselves. So we want to continue to support test environments where students approach the test confidently and they're able to do their best work. We're talking about what kinds of protocols we can put in place when students want to opt out of the test. Do they stay in that same testing environment with other students, or do they move to a different test environment? We actually have very low opt-out rates in District 64. It's about 3%. And we want to make sure that all students have the opportunity to prepare for the test by practicing that format before they're in that test setting. So our next steps then are to implement the recommendations from the audit. We're going to continue to focus on high-impact instruction, so we're focusing on strategies for differentiation and formative assessment and goal setting with students. We'd really like to hit that strategic plan target of outperforming our same schools group. We are in the process, I've talked at the board table before, of designing common assessments in each subject area. And one of the things that common assessments do is they're directly aligned to our curriculum, so they can better help teachers design differentiated instruction. So they can see where kids are related to the curriculum and design activities and experiences for different flexible groups. And finally, each year the state nominates schools to the U.S. Department of Education for the Blue Ribbon School Award. The nominations are announced in January, and they're based on the Illinois State Board's ranking of schools. Two of our elementary schools have relatively high park scores. So Washington's overall score is at 70% of students meeting or exceeding, and Carpenter's is at 64%. And so we don't know yet, but we're anxious to see if this higher achievement on the park assessment will earn us a nomination from the state. So we will wait to hear from the Department of Education in January about that possibility.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
You said 3% opt out of taking the test.
Mm-hmm.
Are there a group of children at one school more than others opting out?
Didn't seem like it when principals were filling in that grid.
Yeah.
I think it was pretty evenly distributed.
No, I think, well, certainly middle school students have stronger opinions about, they kind of have, they assert their own initiative around things differently than elementary kids. So I'd have to go back and look. If I had to guess, I might say middle school, possibly more at middle school. But is it pretty well dispersed? Because everybody has a sibling, and that's usually a family choice, right?
I was going to say, isn't opting out probably driven by parents?
It has to be. The parents have to allow them to opt out.
Sure.
Scanning through this doc, middle school, certainly more middle schoolers, but Emerson, Lincoln looks pretty close. I can do an exact tally, but it looks fairly evenly distributed amongst the two middle schools and a handful of kids at each elementary, it seems. But I can get exact numbers and include it in my Friday memo.
I was just curious because if it's more opting out at one school, a huge amount, then we've got an administrative problem with the administrators, or something's going on.
It's got nothing to do with administrators.
No, it's parent choice on whether or not they want their child for 2 weeks.
Okay, but
Parents allowed.
So my question to Dr. Lopez is, when I look at the graph here of comparable districts, and I'm looking at the ELA section, and I see a bunch of districts clustered at that 58, 59 mark, and then there's a big jump to the high 60s in ELA. You see a similar scenario in math, where there's a lot of clustering around the high 50s, and then there's a big jump into the 60s. So, there is a lot of factors, and you've brought to light a lot of the factors that will control or affect test scores. And I can't enumerate them all, but you mentioned a lot of them. But the one thing that you didn't mention, and I wonder if it comes out very clearly in this, is the number of hours per week in class. So, and here's a hypothesis, and I don't know if you necessarily can readily answer it or not. Are the schools that are clustered, is it possible that they have the same contact hours per week, and the schools that jump up, there's more contact hours per week, and how does the increase in contact hours potentially affect some of these scores?
Well, I think 1, 2, 3, 4. I'll have to go back and check my notes, but I think 3 out of the 4 schools that, within the 3 schools that are performing higher than us in the ELA, I believe 2 out of the 3 schools have actually separated their reading and writing blocks, right? So the interesting thing about English language arts is it's actually 3 subject areas in one class. So there's reading, writing, and then listening and speaking. So in 2 out of those 3 districts, and I'll go back and check my notes, because that's one of the things that I was investigating too, Dr. Borelli, is have those districts separated writing instruction from reading instruction.
So perhaps change the ratios so that you're not 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. It's whatever the numbers turn out to be, 50, 40, 10, whatever. Yeah.
But Lori has been looking as part of our middle school review, tracking the number of minutes that other middle schools have, literacy instruction and math instruction. That's part of our study, and we're finding that we're coming up short in those areas.
And short in some and comparable to others. It depends really on whether or not schools have separated that, have blocked ELA. Some districts do it, some districts don't. Most districts do for ELA, or many districts do for ELA. I haven't finished my study yet, so I shouldn't draw any conclusions.
Will that analysis come forward in the springtime presentation to the board?
Yes.
All right, because that's going to be an important concept. The amount of time per student, classroom face-to-face time, we know that teachers represent the most important factor in the classroom, and having our students in front of those teachers is what's important. So I'm very eager to hear the results of that study. Thank you.
Dr. Lopez, I have a question. These tests, the park and map, are they taken solely on the computer, or are some of these schools allowing their kids to take it on paper?
All of our comparables have taken the test on the computer.
In the blue, but Northbrook is still, are they at a paper level still?
You know, I'll call them and confirm, but this year, computer is the default, and you have to request paper from ISBE if you're planning to use paper.
And I know over the last couple of years, so the example, my former district, District 27 on top, they took a paper assessment.
Yeah, I'd be curious as how students taking the paper test are performing versus taking on the computer, because you see some of these kids sitting in front of the laptop all day racing through these tests. I wonder if they're paying a little bit more attention when it's given in paper version.
To go along,
that would affect our scores, and if they would go up.
to go along with that, I think a few years ago I brought this up. When we do take it on computer, the first time we took it at least, there was an issue where some little calculator popped up and our kids were completely lost by it. They had no clue why that thing popped up. I know from other districts, family that is in other districts, they spent time prior to the test not really teaching what's the content of the test, because you really can't do that, but they were actually teaching them how to take the test, and they were practicing on how to take the test. And our district didn't do that, and it's not because it was actually a good thing we didn't do it, because we got a true assessment of our kids as opposed to one that may have been skewed by practicing for a test you're not supposed to practice for. Do we know if other districts are still practicing for the test to get their scores to be elevated, and are we now, practicing for the test so that our scores get elevated?
So this is something that's a really interesting philosophical question, right? So at one end of the continuum, you have walking into the test cold, right? And at the other end of the continuum, you have teaching to the test, right? And teaching to the test might look like excessive practice of the test. The midpoint here, sort of that sweet medium, I think would be having students feel confident that they can do the test, and they're not taking they're not getting surprised by format. Right? The park is an online assessment. There are online tools that pop up, and there are things that kids need to know about typing in the boxes and calculating things to complete the math and highlighting tools for the ELA that if they have never seen it before the test event, it's going to be a problem for them.
And I think that happened to us a few years ago. But more so, I'm a little, concerned about how these all balance out, because I have firsthand knowledge that some other districts took teaching time, classroom time, for weeks in advance to the park and actually practiced the test, whether it was just form or whether it was actual content to help them be more, if you practice something enough, something might be similar to what you practice that pops up on the test. Boom, there's 2 extra points. There's 3 extra points. And in this, from what I understand, from my deep knowledge of the park and looking into it heavily, 1 or 2 questions really changes the game. It really makes a difference on grades. If each kid gets 1 or 2 questions right more, it can skew these numbers.
I think the question is, where can we look for natural places in the curriculum for students to have experiences that are similar to the standardized assessment, but where we're not teaching to the test? One of the things that I keep saying is, for us as a district, 57 the park test is hard. 57 is a competitive score, but I could very easily see us in the low 60s or mid 60s without becoming this test crazy driven culture. I think it's very low hanging fruit for us.
The reason I bring it up is because initially years ago when I first got on this board, I may have been the guy that, hey, I want to get that 82. I want to be up at the top there. However, I'm now slowly starting to see that we can actually use our growth now that we actually have it, now that Park's been around for a little bit, we can actually use a little bit of the growth, and we can see where were we 2 years ago, and if we've grown exponentially in that period of time, and we're continually doing the same thing where we're teaching them to be familiar with the test, with the functions of the test, so they don't get blindsided by that, and we just rely on their knowledge on what they've learned, well, we get a true assessment of where we're at.
Right.
And the number 57 is not as important as the growth from 52 to 57 or from 49 to 57. If I see no growth there, that's where I would start getting concerned today, as opposed to where I was 2 years ago.
Sorry. One of the things that the auditors, the two gals that helped us with the audit, talked about, and Lori was talking about it, is that notion of embedded practice. So how judicious are we being with the time that we're teaching kids, and what tasks are we having them do? And are they rigorous tasks like Park expects, or are they tasks that we've done in the past that might be at a lower level? And then how do we swap those tasks out so the practice is embedded and it's not something in addition? It's not, here kids, run through these release Park questions and let's take valuable teaching time away so we can just practice. And I think that that's one of the things that the specialists are working with the teachers on, and that, you know, Lori's department continues to focus on. Would you agree? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Since we are talking about schools, I just wanted to mention, I know a year ago we had this surprise where great schools destroyed us, and not just us, but many districts around us. For some reason, great schools decided they wanted to do something different, I guess. And I monitor this, I look, I keep, track, and I noticed that our middle schools are back at 9 and 10. From, I think, 7 and 6 or 7 and 8.
Actually, Emerson's 9, Lincoln's 8, and the rest of our schools are all 8s.
No, I have Lincoln as a 10. I'm looking at it right now.
Just in my memo the other day.
I just Googled it. So maybe they upped you again. But I'm looking at grade schools assessment. It says Lincoln Middle School at 10, Emerson at 9, Maine South at 9, and then our middle schools ranging from 6 to 8, which is a huge increase from where it was last year. My question is, do we have a plan to, or how we're going to move from, get out of those 6s and 7s and get back to the 8s, 9s in our middle schools?
Not where we are, though.
I'm sorry?
I'm trying to find the link. With the new metrics, all of our schools, and this was just in my memo a week or two ago. Does everyone remember seeing it?
Yes,
Trying to
I
think
do.
about I'm trying to remember which Friday it was.
Okay.
We're all 8s with the exception of Emerson, which was a 9. Bernadette, do you remember that?
The problem with grade schools, when this first came up, I went into any number of different sites and brought up the same data on different screens, and all the data was different. You're not going to find same consistent number. So you can bring it up on one area and it'll be 8s, in another area it'll be 6s. It's all over the board. And I made mention of this when we had this discussion last time. So I went to current properties for sale on the web, and if you scroll to the bottom of those page, when I looked up every one of those properties, there was a Great Schools number. And then I went to greatschools.com and the numbers were completely different. So the numbers are all over. So I guess you got to take it all with a grain of salt. So the bottom line is...
I was bringing it up more so to say thank you for the efforts that you guys made to correcting that and fixing it. I understand there's a small discrepancy on different websites as to maybe by 1 point or by a 6 or a 7 or an 8 or a 9, but I guess the concern of last year where we were in the browns, little brown circles, not greens, it has been remedied somehow, and I just wanted to thank you for that.
Yeah, a big thank you to Mrs. Tram for coordinating that communication effort and getting that straightened out. From what I understand, Great Schools was actually using an older metric that they then deleted. But we'll talk in a few minutes about ESSA, which is new legislation that will that I suspect companies like Great Schools will be using some of the metrics from that in the future.
And to be clear, people like us who are in this every day don't put a ton of weight on grade schools. However, the normal individual who is looking for homes puts weight on it, which is why your efforts, all of you who corrected that, is very important to the entire community of Park Ridge, not just the schools, but also to city council and everybody else that pays taxes in Park Ridge, because when someone who is not as in tune goes and searches a home and then sees a 4 next to the elementary school, their initial reaction is going to be like, wait a second, why do I want to move there if the school's a 4? I'm going to go, move to another place.
Right.
So it as a visual and as a tool that people do rely on, it was very important for us to correct that. And again, thank you for the work for correcting it.
Yeah, I agree. The third thing we'll talk about is our 5 Essentials survey. So the Illinois 5 Essentials survey measures 5 dimensions of school organizational culture. And research shows that schools that are ranked strongly on 3 or more of these dimensions are more likely to improve student learning. So the 5 dimensions are effective leaders, collaborative teachers, ambitious instruction, supportive environment, and involved families. And so schools are rated on these dimensions anywhere from least implementation, which is the lowest score you can earn, to most implementation, which is the highest score you can earn. So this information is on our 2017 school report card, and it's from spring 2017. So the information is on each of the individual schools' report cards. And the survey is administered every other year, so we'll administer it again in 2019. And our school improvement teams use the 5E data to help set school level goals. So we had some interesting strengths and opportunities for growth this year. Generally, our strengths are that teachers and parents are partners in improving student learning, that parents are active participants in their child's schooling, and that students demonstrate behaviors that lead to academic achievement. And then there's a part of the survey that actually students complete. And our students report that teachers connect, or 6th through 8th grade students, so middle school students complete. Our students report that teachers connect with students and support their learning, that students and teachers share a high level of mutual trust and respect, that students feel safe at school and traveling to and from school, that they have opportunities to build and apply knowledge in their math classes, that teachers expect students to do their best, and that students participate in classroom discussion that builds their critical thinking skills. We also identified opportunities for growth. Interestingly, and Dr. Borelli, this kind of ties to your earlier comment, students expressed that they need increased opportunities to build and apply critical reading and writing skills. So that's one of the things that came out of the 5E survey. Generally on the survey, we have about 5 goals that we're going to target. We need to focus on increasing the level of teacher-principal trust. We want to improve progress monitoring to ensure our school programs are consistent with our student learning goals. And then 3 goals related to professional development. We want to increase teacher feedback regarding our in-service programs. We want to provide more time during professional development for teachers to reflect on and try new ideas. And then last, we want to provide teachers with more opportunities to observe each other's practice and work. And we actually have started tackling that last one this fall. We've established several learning labs at the elementary and middle school level where teachers are observing each other in English language arts. So, as I said, these individual school results for the 5 Essentials survey can be found on the Illinois report card. And we could take a second and look quickly at the Illinois report card. The Illinois report card has a lot of information on it. So there's a district report card in this online site, and then there are report cards for each of our individual schools. So you can look and see what our academic progress is as a district. You can see facts about our district environment, including district finances, average class size, total school days, pieces like that. You can see metrics that are connected to our students. So who are the students that we serve? You can see some indicators related to our teaching staff. So So what are the demographics of our teaching staff? What's our teaching education? What's the education level of our teachers? What's our retention rate? You can see some similar things related to our administrators. And then finally, at the bottom of this, you can link to each of our individual schools' report cards. There's also a nice at-a-glance report card that comes up as a PDF, and we've linked these at-a-glance report cards to our district website. So as required by state law, all of our school report cards are actually published to the district website. The next piece that we'll talk about is the Every Student Succeeds Act. And in 2015, the ESSA is what we call it, the Every Student Succeeds Act was signed into law. And ESSA reauthorizes the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, which actually has been revised several times since 1965. But the most recent reauthorization that you're probably familiar with is No Child Left Behind, so NCLB. And ESSA takes effect now, but it will be fully implemented in 2018-19. So beginning in 2018-19, schools are going to be required to analyze their data from all of their students and then subgroup data. And in doing that, schools are going to earn one of 4 ratings. And the highest rating is a Tier 1 exemplary school. And a Tier 1 exemplary school is a school that has no underperforming subgroups, and their performance is in the top 10% of all schools. And the lowest ranking that you could get is a Tier 4 school. And a Tier 4 school means that you're performing in the lowest 5% of schools in Illinois that receive Title I funding. Each year, schools will have increasingly higher math and reading proficiency targets. And this is a similar theme that was in NCLB, but Illinois' goal is to have 90% of students being proficient, right, by 2032. So beginning in 2019, ISBE will also provide each school with a growth rating on the Illinois report card. So in addition to tracking our performance on the Illinois assessment, on the PARCC assessment, ISBE will be tracking growth. And they'll be tracking growth, interestingly enough, compared to schools that they consider like schools for Park Ridge and compared to all schools in the state. So for both comparisons, they're going to assign us a grade, an A through F grade. But when they're deciding what rating your school gets, they're going to use a series of indicators. So about 75% of our rating will be made up of academic indicators. And those are things like our performance on the PARCC assessment, or some of our special education students take an alternative assessment called dynamic learning maps, or the DLM. Other academic indicators will be the growth score that I just mentioned, the proficiency of our English learners. And then beginning in 2019-2020, they'll be integrating our performance on the Illinois Science Assessment. So we've taken the Illinois Science Assessment for 2 years. We've never received scores yet from ISBE on our Illinois Science Assessment. Those scores haven't been released. They're anticipating that they'll be scoring and sharing those scores after this year's assessment. 25% of our rating will be made up of student success indicators, and those will be things like chronic absenteeism, which we have very low chronic absenteeism, our performance on the 5 Essentials survey, which is very strong. There'll be some indicator related to fine arts. They haven't finalized that yet. And then there'll be a pre-kindergarten through 2nd grade indicator, and then an elementary and middle school indicator. And they haven't finalized what that looks like yet. But again, the performance data, the academic data, and the student success data will be calculated for subgroups. So there's a list of our subgroups on the right of this slide, and then also for all of our students. So if we have one or more underperforming subgroup, right now the criteria is that we wouldn't be able to get a higher rating than Tier 3. The last thing that we'll talk about is our District 64 balanced scorecard. So it's been updated to reflect all of the metrics that are in this report, and it's linked to our District 64 website. We're going to be updating information about subgroup performance for MAP after we introduce our new LMS. So Mary Jane Warden talked about this at our last meeting about how we'll be using PowerSchool Unified to help us organize our data related to subgroup performance and general student performance. One of the things that we've been working on in collaboration with District 207, and this slide has been updated since the board report was submitted, is where do our students place as freshmen when they get to high school? So District 207 offers accelerated placements in foreign language, in English language arts, and in math. And this year, 207 actually offered accelerated placements in science. And there's some discussion about possibly having an accelerated placement in art beginning in 1920, I think. District 207 was kind enough to share this data with us. Right now, we don't have art data, obviously, because that hasn't started yet. And foreign language placements, I believe, are adjusted after the end of this trimester. So that information will be coming. But in terms of English language arts, math, and science, about half of our kids enter into District 207 as freshmen in the accelerated English language arts program. About 53% of our students place in either Algebra 2 or beyond Algebra 2, and 34% of our kids, so a third of our kids, placed into either accelerated biology or accelerated chemistry as freshmen. So we were excited about that initial placement data, and we're looking forward to getting more data connected to fine arts on that. And again, that information will be updated on our balanced scorecard. So that is a summary of our data for this year. We look forward to implementing the things that I discussed and coming back to the board this spring and next fall with an updated performance.
Lori, when you're talking about Tier 3 underperforming school, one or more underperforming subgroups, are these subgroups compared to similar subgroups, or are they compared to like the average kid?
You know, it's interesting. What the proposal says right now is that your subgroups are expected to track with all students who are in that lowest 5% of schools in Illinois. So your subgroups have to at least be tracking with the general population of kids in the lowest 5% of underperforming schools.
Not the subgroup, but of the school.
Of the school, yes. So our subgroup, our EL subgroup, has to at least be doing as well as the average of the lowest 5% of schools in Illinois, as I understand it. But it doesn't sound very straightforward, does it?
I got it.
Yeah.
And before, did you say currently if we were using those 4 tiers right now, would we be in Tier 3 or Tier 2?
You know, I don't have that information because I don't have the rankings or the indicators yet.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions? Thank you, Dr. Lopez. In 1 second. We've already discussed this, but Dr. Hines, is there any next item would be intergovernmental agreement update on school resource? Have we pretty much discussed that enough?
I think so. I actually kind of went out of sequence in response to Dr. I went out of sequence in response to Dr. Pennington. The big update for the board was that I shared the agreements. We've received one back from Park Ridge. We know that it's going to move through City Council twice in December. Haven't heard back from Niles. So we're again in a holding pattern why these drafts continue to change hands. So I will, once I hear back from Niles, we'll put it on the agenda in January 22nd to be exact. And then at that time, the board can decide if they want to take action or discuss, or if they want to have it come back for a meeting in February.
Thank you.
Okay?
All righty. And before we go any further, The board has heard information tonight about some student issues, and I would like to invite Jane Boyd, still here, at some point tonight, not exactly now, to come up and have this conversation with the board so the board can get some background on exactly what's cooking and going on with all this. And I would also ask, is everybody up for a 5-minute break at this point?
Yes.
Yes. Great. So why don't we take a break for 5 minutes, and we'll reconvene literally in 5 minutes. Next item on our agenda is Summer Interim Session 2017 Report and Presentation Approval of the Summer Interim Session 2018. This is beginning on page 59, having an action item on page 61. We begin the discussion on Worlds of Wonder Summer School.
So this is a short report that summarizes our last year's summer school and sort of provides an overview of what we'll do this year. So last year, the program served almost 900 students. And because of the way that the 4th of July fell, we had 2 13-day sessions over a 6-week period. Due to summer construction projects, we actually had the programs at Washington and at Emerson. So we had our K-3 program at Washington and our 4th through 7th grade program at Emerson. The program, as is typical, we've had these numbers run over the past several years. About 20% of our students enroll in support classes, and the remaining number of classes that students enroll in are either band or orchestra or our enrichment classes. This past year, we recognized a small profit of about $4,500. We ended up not printing WOW brochures because our online advertising was successful. And we experienced a decreased cost in crossing guards.
By the way, did that $40,000 stay in the education fund, or was it allocated to the debt service? No, I'm just kidding.
This year, we're going to locate the program. Our proposal for 2018 is that we locate the program at Washington and at Lincoln again. This really is the best place for summer school because it's more convenient for families because of how close the schools are. And neither Washington nor Lincoln are scheduled for extensive summer work.
They've already had their share.
So this year we'll offer 2 14-day sessions, and again, we won't have school on July 4th. We'll start registration as we have in the past on March 1st at 10 o'clock. And we'll close online registration after May 30th. Last year was the first year that we closed registration instead of continuing it through summer school, and it was wonderful. It provided us with 3 business days to organize our attendance sheets and keep track of all of our students' medical needs, and it worked really well. Because of the extra day this year, we'll plan to increase tuition from $125 to $130. Out-of-district students and students who register after April 15th, we increase the cost for that by $20 to $150 for a 3-week session. There's information about the projected budget on page 3. And the Worlds of Wonder program is really a nice service for parents. Our goal is always to provide a quality program within a budget that is self-sustaining, and we've been able to do that for the past several years. So we're looking forward to summer of 2018.
I'm sorry to cut you off, but the reports have always been excellent with the program. My main concern or concerns would be on page 61, the actual graph of the expenses and income to sustain the program to be able to pay for itself going forward. And I can't recall, but I believe there was usually about 900 matriculants per year. Is that about right? Yeah. So if you go up by $5 a head, that's about $4,000, right? So when you look at projected summer tuition and materials fees on the revenue side, there's only an increase of about $400. So if you went up by $5 and you spread that across, the numbers aren't evening out. Something's missing here for me.
So one of the things that Mr. Imhoff and I did, and Brian's not here right now, but I can share that information with you, is we went back and we looked at the number of registrations and how many registrations were for 6-week programs and how many were for 3-week. And then how many came in after April 15th. And then we looked back and thought a little bit about the impact of that 4th of July holiday. And we felt like this was a good projection of what would happen. Are you thinking that the $5 is too much?
No, I don't know if it's enough. I mean,
okay.
Because you're going from 2 13-day periods to 2 14-day periods. So your expenses are going to be increased. You have a $5 increase on charges. That's great. But my question is the $5 increase in charges, assuming you have the same number of students year to year, is the $5 increase in charges going to offset the extra 2 days of expenses? That was my concern, and I'm not so sure that's going to cover it.
So we ran the numbers, and the numbers historically told us that it would. And some of that is because of the larger group that registers after April 15th. It's not the larger group, but a group of people who wait and make their plans after April 15th when that cost is a little bit higher.
So they'll make up the difference.
Were you going to add something?
So provided everybody registers after April 15th, we're okay.
No. Not provided everybody does, but that we continue to have the same trend that we've had in the past.
Well, let's hope that your ideas, it all holds out. And there was one other thing I was going to explain. What was the thought process behind going from a 13-day to a 14-day? Is it just the way the calendar worked out, or?
Yeah, it's the way the 4th of July holiday falls.
Yeah.
So when it was on Tuesday last year, we thought most people wouldn't come on Monday and then probably wouldn't want to pay for a week of summer school.
Gotcha. Okay. Other questions? I didn't cut you off. Are there anything else you have?
No. That's it.
I know it was pretty quick. If no other questions, no other thoughts, a motion?
I move that the Board of Education of Community Consolidated School District 64, Park Ridge-Niles, Illinois, approves recommendations of dates and fees for the 2018 summer interim session.
Second?
Second.
Mark's got the second, starting with Fred.
Yes.
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 Yes. Yes.
All righty. Now, I've asked Jane Boyd to come and the next item on the agenda is actually a settlement agreement with FGM, which we have already jumped to. So prior to getting into the approval of the electricity contract, I've asked Ms. Jane Boyd, who is our student service director, to come and speak with us based on some of the things that we have heard tonight from some members in the community. So perhaps, Jane, you can fill us in and give us some insight on what is and isn't happening.
Sure. So in order to understand the current situation, I want to take us back to about 6 years ago and then move forward again. So the model that was used in the elementary schools 6 years ago was the model that's most common in most elementary schools in the area, and that is that they create special education classrooms and they put them in specific satellited sites. So 6 years ago, students with significant needs had classes only at Franklin or Carpenter. Didn't matter where they lived, they were bused to those two schools. That's an acceptable model. In fact, that's probably the most common model. That's what we would find in most neighborhood suburbs or nearby suburbs. A director before me made a very progressive recommendation, which was to create small self-contained instructional classrooms in each neighborhood school. So now if a student has significant needs and needs to be in a special ed class most of the day, we offer that class in all 5 elementary schools. That change happened before I came. In some buildings, they created all primary class and an intermediate class And then they made a decision that I've been undoing, which was to flood learning disabled students into those classrooms, taking them out of the core curriculum. So I've come to you before and said we had too many special ed kids not in the core curriculum. What was happening was those classes were built, a primary and an intermediate at each school. Build it, they'll fill it up. They filled it up with LD kids. Those kids weren't getting core curriculum. They were really falling behind academically. So over the last few years, we've been moving those LD students with co-teaching back into Gen Ed. So now what's left are a very small group of students in each elementary school. Last year, Franklin only had 2. We eventually moved them into a class somewhere else. This year, there's another building, Roosevelt has 4. They're very small groups of students who have significant needs. The dilemma is that if the small number of students have now developed a really wide age span in the group. Originally, when the model was created, all the older students got to stay at Carpenter and Franklin and kind of aged up. So we started making classes of young kids in the other buildings. Now what we have are classes of 4 to 7 students, but they're kindergarten through 5th grade, all in one room. That's a problem developmentally for the K-1-2 kids, and those parents are saying, my little guy, my kindergarten guy is going to school with 4th and 5th graders, it's a problem. Also, if you're the only 4th or 5th grader in the class and spending almost all of your instructional day, the majority of your day, with kindergarten 1st and 2nd graders, that's pretty problematic for you too. So the dilemma was, how could we solve the 6-year span in the elementary school and a 3-year span in the middle schools? That's the problem. We started 3 years ago by just piloting solutions. We started with a girl in one of the elementary schools. She was going into 5th grade. She was going to be in the self-contained class. There were no girls within 4 years of her age in her class all day. So she was going to be, there was like a 1st grade girl. That was her closest potential friend. To me, that wasn't quality services for her. So she was the first student that we said, you know what, we're not going to add a new location. We're not going to add an extra bump. How about if you just spend 5th grade up at the middle school where you're going to go anyway, and there's a whole bunch of 6th and 7th grade girls to hang out with. So she moved, and it worked out really well. Her mom was really happy. She went from no peers to a whole group of peers without ever leaving her neighborhood school. She just went a year early. She went to the mainstream classes there, the art, music, PE. The options are greater. So if you're a student with significant needs in the middle schools, you have PE every day, or you can always do music or never do music. There are many more choices for those kids. And she went mainstream, yes, for 1 year when she was in middle school, her 5th grade year. When she went to art or music, she was mostly with 6th graders that year. Then after 1 year, they had kind of caught up and realigned. So first we piloted with her, then we had 2 more students that we've more recently moved up. Right now there's another girl who started Lincoln a year early because she would have either stayed back with very young children at her elementary school or come to Lincoln. Also for students like this, peer modeling is huge. So for these 5th graders, moving them from much younger kids with much lower skills to a year of older kids who are modeling the skills we want them to achieve while they're in special ed, we're actually giving them a better quality instructional experience. So the decision after the 3 kind of pilot students, met with my special ed admin team, went with the whole ad council, all the principals, Lori, all of us, talking about what option makes the most sense for these 5th graders. Oh, one more detail. The state of Illinois does have guidance on this. The state of Illinois only wants 4 years in a self-contained class. And if ever a district goes beyond 4 years, you actually have to petition and fill out forms to get a waiver. This year we had to do 3 waivers because we have K4. Just K4 triggers the need for a waiver.
Not 4 years of a student to be in the self-contained, but the window, the span of youngest to oldest needs to be
the span of
at most 4 years.
Youngest to oldest in the room at one time. is how ISB defines it.
So is this I'm sorry, you might get to this later. So is this a policy that we're enacting like overall district-wide, or are we looking at it on a case-by-case basis?
So we made the decision that we would spend this year communicating with the parents of fourth graders. And we are months ahead of the decision. So what we're talking about with families now is something that we're recommending start in August. So we wanted to give the families a lot of time to adapt. The IEPs are written for how much time in regular ed, how much time in gen ed. We're not changing that for these kids. If they stayed in the elementary school or moved to the middle schools, that balance of services and the types of services, speech, social work, we're maintaining all of that. It's really about which location would they be attending and mainstreamed, and which is better for the kids. So the recommendation was for next year that we move the kids going into fifth to their middle schools a year early. And we were making a systemic recommendation. Much like the old recommendation, all the kids have to go to Carpenter and Franklin, because that was what worked for the system. This year's recommendation is that the fifth graders go to their natural middle schools a year early. Another factor we considered was that these students have significant needs and additional transitions. So we could have done something, and Lori asked me to list options. I'll do those in a second. Could we create an additional class for just fifth graders somewhere? Yeah, but then they'd all have to go there for 1 year and then go to their middle schools. That additional movement is one of the things we were trying to avoid. Just so you know, this idea is cost neutral. It's not a money saver. It's not a money cost, because the classes already exist at Lincoln and Emerson. They're fairly small. So the class at Lincoln, where we moved up the fifth grade girl, she actually just became the fourth student. She came with 2 other students who really hit sixth, who she'd been with for years. So she was a fourth grader, she was a third grader, they were fourth graders, and they moved up. So it looks like we disconnected her, but she just followed kids over here that had been with her back in her elementary school.
So one of the parents brought up a concern that they would miss out on, certain experiences they've been looking forward to, like Camp Duncan and promotion parties. So would they be invited back to those?
I already offered that to one of those mothers. So
you've only met with one
spoken with and met with several. So what I've been there are 2 options that can be discussed that allow us to kind of sort in quality ways and address concerns. One option is to help the students return for special events, like could they go to Camp Duncan if that was important? Sure. Could they go to a fifth grade picnic? Sure. It's kind of like we could do those as field trips back from the new class, and that's an option that I've already offered to concerned parents. Another option, and we did it with one student, we actually did a split day. So his parents had some of these same issues, and we really thought he could handle split day. So he went to the middle school, and he made it through like 6 or 7 periods, and then it worked out, well, why doesn't he go back to his elementary school for PE and art and specials? And he was resilient enough, that made sense. So that's what he did. He got his special ed in the middle school, where he was going to go anyway, and went back for his specials.
So Jane, I'm sorry, go ahead. Well, I was going to say, what I heard tonight by those 2 parents was that their children had developed acquaintances, and not only would they miss those special occurrences, but more importantly, they would miss the relationships that they have developed over the first 2, 3, 4 years of being in school. And that to me was the most telling issue. I understand in the other scenarios that you described how it was actually a better way for some individuals to have better relationships because they're in more like groups. But at least in these 2 instances, and without looking into it and without understanding it anymore, at least what I heard was that perhaps we would be removing them from a situation where they have acquaintances. Can you speak to that?
And speak also, because kind of links to what I was going to say in terms of academic versus cognitive versus social functioning and the matches.
So I'm putting all of the emphasis on the more comprehensive and well-matched relationships in the instructional classrooms. So these students spend, on the average, 75% of their time with those special ed peers. So those friendships are with like learners who have like interests, whether it's Pokemon or whatever it is. They're developmentally similar, their language is similar, and that's where the meaningful, deep friendships come. So if we don't move these fifth graders, they're either the only fifth grader in the elementary school, or let's say there's two of them. These guys have been together forever, but there's no other social opportunity that's meaningful. We befriend people like us with similar interests. So, and these kids that we're talking about that are going to be fifth grade age, I think socially and academically, they would have closer to first grade development and skills. So I'm putting the emphasis on finding them long-lasting, 4-year long-lasting friends that could be with 75% of the time with similar interests. While I have heard parents say, but like they know the boy from down the street and they might see him in music for 20 minutes a day. And that boy has fifth grade interests, and the students we're talking about have first grade interests and first grade language skills. So they're acquaintances, but there isn't a depth of friendship that forms with that large of a gap, as much as the depth of friendship when you're with peers, whatever those peers are, whether it's gifted kids becoming friends with gifted kids, or these guys becoming friends with each other.
Are there perhaps perceived benefits by parents of keeping those children in their regular classes and not moving them to a group of peers?
Well, for all these families, inclusion would be another option.
That's something I asked you. If we don't do this, what's the other option? And you said
so here would be the other options. One option, and it would take the student's IEP team, we could say, you know what, this fifth grade student with first grade skills should spend most of their day in fifth grade. That's what inclusion is, that they just spend it in fifth grade. If that was deemed best for these students, that would be an option. The gap is gigantic. Another option would be that we could authorize a self-contained fifth grade or fourth and fifth grade class. It would mean K1, 2, 3 in your neighborhood school. Whoops, it's 4 or 5. You're all going to the least crowded school. Let's say that's Frank Carpenter. Then they'd all go to Carpenter for fourth and fifth grade. Then they would break apart, half go to Emerson, half go to Lincoln in sixth grade. That's an option. Another option is to keep them in their neighborhood schools, which is, I believe, for the majority of the most socially isolating, because they're spending almost all of their instructional time with one or no meaningful peers, because the classes are so unusually small.
Let me make a comment here. I've volunteered at almost every school in the district. I know the children of these parents. I know Peter, Christian, all his children.
Yeah.
And they do develop relationships as they move through the hallways, as they go to music, as they go out and play on the playgrounds, and they move, and they've developed these relationships, and the parents have developed relationships with other parents in the school. And I just wonder why we can't allow them to have an option of moving their child to the middle school or staying one more year at where they are. If the parents are that passionate, and no one knows more than what's best for their child than the parent of that child. Not that I'm an expert, but I'm the parent of a special child myself. And I think one more year, it's not going to cost us any more money. It's not going to hurt us. And if the parents have that option, let them exercise their option for that fifth grade year to either move them to middle school or leave them where they're at in field school. I don't see anything wrong with letting them do that.
One of the biggest challenges of being a special ed director is weighing the right thing for kids against parent preference. I do that almost every day at work. And so when I can find the compromise that is just as good for the child and feels okay to the parent, that's exactly what I want to do. That makes the most sense to me. You hit on a couple things I agree with. One is that there are those kind of playground relationships. We're not changing those because these kids are just going to be one grade off for 1 year. So those connections are there. You also mentioned something really important. I believe part of the issue is the parents in their mind didn't see this coming. And they're very connected to the other parents in the school. Like that's where they belong, and they didn't see it coming. So they're kind of, wait, I thought I'd be here for the Follies. I thought this was my parent peer group. And that's an issue that we're facing this year. Wouldn't be the long-term issue. If we just did it once, then it would be like, okay, now I get it. I'm going to be 5 years in the Ellenfield parent group and 4 years in the Emerson group. They would know they were going to transition a year early. This year they didn't see it coming, but we've given them a lot of notice to discuss it. So for me, if I could see it as equally valuable for the students we're talking about, I would absolutely be with you on that. But in all of our discussions about what these kids benefit from, and the 3 kids we've moved, while it was a little hard for the parents to think about it in the beginning, it did prove to be better for the kids and the younger kids that stayed behind too. I am thinking about the K-1-2 kids going to class in a class of 4 where 2 of them are 5th graders. That's tricky too.
And Jane, nobody appreciates what you do more than I do. And I've had many conversations with you, in-depth conversations, and you walk a fine line. You're absolutely correct, and it's not a job I could do in any stretch of the imagination. But I am practical, and above all things, I'm very practical. And if you tell somebody in the 2nd grade, by the time you hit 4th grade or 5th grade, we're going to be thinking about making a move. There's a different conversation you have than if you have somebody in the 4th grade and you make that same comment.
Sure.
And I think this is what Larry was getting at. And, you know, these parents have an enormous amount of stress to deal with already. And whomever they connect with, the students, the parents, the school, it's just one more change. So I'm wondering if the path here, because these folks were fairly passionate tonight, you know, over their children. Maybe there's a middle road, you know? I mean, you said before, and, you know, I'm not so concerned about the cost. I am concerned a little bit about the transportation issue, about what I'm about to say. But having a split day where they can still reside at their home school, share in the atmosphere, the community of that school with the parents and everything else, and yet still matriculate on an educational level for part of the day at the middle school. And that way, it seems to me, the children get the education, they get the camaraderie of a peer group, and yet they still have the environment of their home school to go along with that. So if you have considered that, that's great. If you haven't, I'd like you to. But it seems to me from what I heard tonight, that perhaps might be a way for resolution.
And you're doing that with one student this year, correct?
We did it with a student last year, and it worked out okay.
Yeah.
And I've already mentioned it to one of the parents you heard from tonight. I already offered that option.
Oh, good.
It's almost as though they got their rug taken out from under them.
And maybe
What was their reaction to your offer?
The concern about the additional transition. Like, but my student needs stability and predictability. And so the 2 buildings, 2 worlds, 2 sets of friends thing might be too much for him.
And maybe we explore what Anthony offered and what Larry was concerned about, and start the new process with incoming first graders, so that we can eventually get to what your recommendation is, but we don't affect the current students who are already in the district who didn't expect it. And, you know, over the next 4 years, it turns into the program that you're looking for, but everyone that comes into the district knows it from day one. They know that their kid will be in grammar school 4 years, and then we just kind of slowly get there. And in the meantime, we offer the option.
Grandfather some 10-year-olds in, right?
What's that?
We're going to grandfather class some 10-year-olds.
Right. I mean, I just think that may solve we'll get to where we feel it's best for the kids, and then we still allow the parents to have some sort of say, the ones that are already here who expected something different, as to how their child is going to be addressed. And because they are the parents and they have a right to do it, whether we believe it's because they're doing it for their own personal or for the child's well-being, that's really the family's choice at that point. I know you have a job to protect these children, and no, I get that, but you know, ultimately the parent can move, right? If they don't like it, they can go somewhere else.
The parent could pick inclusion, the parent could change communities.
Right.
The parent could cancel all special ed services.
And we don't want that.
We don't want any of
that, 'cause
those.
that's not going to be good for anybody. So if we can work with them to make them comfortable and still get to the goal that you're recommending, I think that would probably be the best option.
Or even if we just set a time, I'd say, okay, in 2 years, you know, let's give the parents of these special children a couple of years to take a deep breath and say, okay, in 2 years, we're going to kick this program off. But your child now that's in the 4th grade will attend the 5th grade. Your child that's in the 3rd grade will attend the 4th and 5th grade. But everybody K1, 2, be prepared, because they're going to only do 2 more years here, and then they're going to a middle school.
And you may or may not need that every year based on your numbers, correct? To transition kids sooner? Is it really?
There are some years we wouldn't have a 5th grader,
Some
or
years it wouldn't be necessary because you have enough
or the elementary class
like-aged peers in a group.
The elementary class might be older. There's no way to predict it, but it's likely that this is the new pattern. My other concern, and I'm speaking more for future special ed directors and more philosophically, it is a challenge for a special ed director to have 2 particular cases brought out into the public forum.
Oh, yeah.
And it's also a challenge for a special ed director for what I would consider an important, detailed decision to be rethought by the school board. So if it became a district where the special ed decisions could be kind of aired here for rethinking, that is very problematic for any special ed director in the state. So I agree with a lot of what you've said. The split day option, the return for special events, all that makes a lot of sense to me. And I think we'll just need to look at how to work with these families. There are several families in this situation. Some don't seem to be as concerned. So
that's why my point was give them an option. Those that aren't concerned.
I appreciate your comment, the last one you just made. However, I got to tell you, when parents step up to this meeting and have that much emotion when they're speaking of it, I think it would only be prudent for this board to question the special ed director, whoever that may be. It would just be, I mean, there's no way we should ever even consider adopting a policy where the special ed director would not get questioned when parents come to the podium in that
for you to want me to explain makes total sense to me. There should be transparency in the procedures to all of you. For an IEP team or admins to give a parent a recommendation, and then for them to think this is the forum to have that individual student decision overturned, that's what would be problematic. Not that you've asked me to explain. That feels very appropriate.
Yeah, I don't think anybody's asking you to. I've heard everybody here, including me especially, ask you to consider.
Sure, okay.
Because for one important thing, we don't know the background. We haven't studied. We don't know what's going on in the classroom. We don't know the levels of these students. We don't know their needs. We don't know their IEPs. That's not what we're here for.
Okay.
That's what you're here for. But hearing the parents, you know, I would hope that you would it sounds like there's still some negotiation going on as far as the final adjudication of where these students are going to be. And as long as there's still conversation going, I guess what we're asking, certainly what I'm asking, is that you consider other options, all the options, and find a happy ground. And that's really all I'm asking.
Okay, thanks.
So I just have a quick question, just procedurally, how we got here tonight, how the board was a bit, I'll use the term a bit loosely, blindsided by the public comments on there. Is this the type of discussion and policy that is truly not at the board level, that it's operational? It would never come to the board? Because obviously I think, I'm speaking for the 7 of us, we didn't know that there was this change, this policy change that took place operationally. Is this ever something that would have to come to the board for approval?
As a memo of information or just keeping the board up to date, knowing that by passing something like this, we're going to hear feedback from the community. So as a heads up memo, yes, that information would come out, but as far as a discussion like this,
or board approval, we would not have we would never be voting on something like this.
This is clearly beyond anybody's knowledge here, and I'd be ridiculous to even consider that I know anything about what you're talking about. So the long and the short of it is, we're acting primarily on some comments of some community members who we are responsible to.
Sure.
And that's why we're having this conversation.
And I'd like to just comment that
What I would recommend in the future, if I may, is what we typically do with public comment is we can get information out to you via memo or at the next meeting instead of doing it being responsive in the moment. Because a lot of this was through the grapevine. We've had one conversation, to my knowledge. I don't know necessarily that it was a final conversation. You're building that runway of this is what we're thinking, this is the rationale. Maybe you should go visit the school. It's September, it's October. So, we've kind of jumped many steps in response to impassioned parents. And I appreciate their concern, but this is a little atypical.
I will say, though, this looks a little, frankly, odd that we're doing this at 10:22 at night with virtually no one in the audience right now, as if we are explaining ourselves once everyone went home, so that we wouldn't get additional questioning from the public.
But I intend to do a follow-up, and which is why also we could have put it on the agenda had we not chosen to talk about it in this very moment, because then we would have been on the agenda as an item.
I think
as far as odd words placement, Rick.
No, and I'm not suggesting we did it that way. I'm just saying it perception-wise.
Well, the reality is we have a live meeting occurring, and there are certain items that have to be addressed in a certain sequence. And this, frankly, was the first opportunity to plug it in.
No, this would be something that would come up like in a policy type meeting where they set policy on how this type of thing can.
This is day-to-day operations.
This is
how we assign
operations, not board.
special
That's fine.
education students. It's not a board.
And I just want to acknowledge that Jane's made a career out of she's made a career out of accommodations and case-by-case basis. And so I have no doubt that that it'll be similarly.
Thanks.
I actually think it's great that we discussed it tonight for the one reason that some of the comments that led us, or at least led me to believe that this was a done deal, their kids were moving, and this helped clarify, Jane helped clarify to whoever's going to watch the video, because they can still watch the video if they're not here. And to your point, we had to go step by step, and we slipped this in so that we can accommodate some of these speakers who we didn't frankly knew were going to come here to talk about this. They just showed up. So I just wanted to say that it's good to know that this isn't something that the way I assumed it to be, from what I listened to, that it was a done deal. These kids are moving next year, and you weren't even talking to the parents about it. You sent them a memo, said, okay, your kid's going, goodbye, have a nice day. That's not what happened from what I'm understanding. Right. From what I'm understanding, it's still an ongoing discussion with these families, still trying to find ways to accommodate them, still trying to make the process happen if it need be, but happen in a way that is going to accommodate everyone. Right? That's really good to hear.
Thank you, Jane.
Thank you.
Now, getting back to
And then Jane hit the road.
getting back to our regularly scheduled program, the approval on page 74 with an action item on page 75 Luann's going to provide an electrifying explanation of our power needs.
There's a big build up there, so you better do something spectacular.
Give you a sing name.
Yeah, interpretive dance, please.
I actually don't.
So last year, in August, we approved a one-year contract with Direct Energy for electrical services in the district. Oops,
I shut myself off already, sorry. Last year, we approved a one-year contract with Direct Energy for electrical services in the district, and decided at that time, based on the information they had given me, to not move forward with locking in additional years, which is actually a good thing as it turns out. This year, in looking at how we would proceed with our electrical purchases going forward, and the board being interested in, us, bidding out items and getting quotes and proposals, which is great. I talked with Tradition Energy, who won the Energy Consulting and Management Services contract, which is a competitively solicited bid for these services through U.S. Communities. I have included in your board packet and in Lori's Friday memo the week before information on that in U.S. Communities. So U.S. Communities is a national cooperative purchasing program for government entities, and we have used U.S. Communities in this district, and I've used them in past districts even to buy vehicles. So with Tradition Energy, we received bids from 9 vendors for periods between 12 and it's actually 60 months we received. So the fee is structured, what Tradition Energy receives is 2.5% of the total electricity budget. And when I calculated it was about less than $10,000 a year, which is pretty reasonable for them to receive. I also included information on how our electricity is determined in the state of Illinois and which power market we fall into, and some of the major factors driving the cost of electricity in our market, which is the Pennsylvania, Jersey, Maryland market. 2 of our nuclear plants in Illinois in 2016, they passed a future energy jobs bill, which is keeping both of those online, with improvements coming to the nuclear plants in Clinton and the Quad Cities. Our wholesale electrical prices at this time remain at an all-time low, as we're benefiting from different sources of fuel, nuclear, natural gas, and wind. And then we are also looking at the possibility of a coal-fired plant in southern Illinois shutting down because their product is selling so cheap they can't make a profit. So looking at the market conditions and at a price that's actually lower than what we paid last year and considerably lower what the district had paid for the last 5 years, I would be recommending that we move forward with a 60-month agreement. Constellation Energy this morning was the lowest quote that we received. So on the new document I gave you, the bottom there, the Constellation Energy, the 0.0621, that's actually, if we locked in for 5 years, we would get 0.0621 every year for the 5 years. And last year we locked in for 0.0625 for our electricity. Prior to that, for our new board members, we were locked in, this is prior to me coming here, at 0.07. So we took a big bath. This is also a 100% swing contract, which means if we use more or less, we're not penalized by the supplier having to try and sell that energy. So swing contracts are good if we shut a building down for major construction, or we had talked about potentially, we'll be coming back to the board to talk about options with this building. We would also put in this agreement that the potential for this building, to potentially be sold, so that there would be no penalizing of the district going forward if we removed this building.
ESC,
not this building.
Not Washington. Right?
Not Washington, not
Boy,
Washington, sorry.
Right.
Yeah, Rick should have blinked more.
Yeah.
Any questions?
No, I think the important thing, because my question, the very question that you just answered, was the fact that we're going to be able to hopefully lock somebody in at .0621 versus the .7 that we had previously been at. So we're locked in 60 months, 5 years, lower rates, and the only way to improve our efficiencies would be we have new boilers running more efficient, and we've got a lot more insulation now.
Well, and we're increasing, replacement of light fixtures with LED light fixtures that don't catch on fire.
Right.
So.
Okay. So, any questions, comments, concerns regarding the light fixtures?
So tomorrow morning, how we wrote the action item was, because they reprice this every morning, so it's done on a daily basis, that we would not exceed .07. But since we're seeing that .0621 holding, I'm thinking, well, that's what we'll see tomorrow, or hopefully even better would be great.
Yeah. So supplant the .07, .0621. That kind of hamstrings you, though.
Yeah, I wouldn't change this. Yeah, we just need to put some kind of not to exceed. It doesn't have to be that high. You could put .065 or something.
Well, let's not mess with it. Just leave it, knowing that you're going to go for the lowest number anyway.
Right.
I just have one question.
Sure.
Did you look into other companies other than Tradition, or and how did you come to use Tradition?
Because they are won the bid through U.S. Communities. So
the other group saved us 130 grand.
Yeah, well, we'll save money going forward now too, because we're at a lower rate. But I just felt like they went through U.S. Communities, competed in a national bid for this, and that's not like me just plucking somebody out or using somebody I know or something like that.
So Tradition Energy is considered
They're a, what would you call them? Kind of a broker.
No, I know they're a broker, but they're considered not an authorized, but a recommended because they went through some other process? Or?
They're the energy consulting and management services for U.S. Communities, so that's the contract they actually won.
What is U.S. Community? Am I missing something?
It's a government purchasing cooperative.
Okay.
So different states might issue the bid. So I think for this one, it may have actually been in Texas. So different places would issue the bid for something, and it goes through U.S. Communities. And if they win the bid, then anyone that belongs to U.S. Communities gets that price. So like used them to buy a truck, right? If they'll win the bid to be the company that provides costing for commercial vehicles, obviously we would always, like with a truck, look here and then go to outside and say, can you meet this price?
I know how absolutely annoying shopping for energy is.
Mm-hmm.
So I do it.
Oh, yeah.
I do it myself. But I also found that I can use one broker and then take that broker's info and give it to another broker and see a different rate. And that's the only reason I bring this up. Is if
the only thing is, one of the companies, Direct Energy, that we talked to last year said they're only going to give the price like to one company. So I don't know if because every time I do that, I have to sign new agreements for them to release prices.
Because they're on to Utah.
They're on to Utah, yeah.
Or other people that do that. Shop the rate with the rate.
5.
Yeah. Right.
So they're basically locked in to prevent shopping. Yeah. Okay,
so
any other questions?
Yeah, one more comment from me. Over the years, I struggled greatly with gas and electric contracts that were for that long a period of time, because in your information, you presented some arguments as to what the chances are of rates going up. But one of your things in here specifically says the wholesale electricity prices remain at an all-time low as the region benefits from competition between multiple fuel sources. It talks about that. We haven't talked about what the chances are that the rates are going to go down, and we're locking ourselves in to 60 months when 24 months from now the rates could be even lower than .0621. So I think there's a cost-benefit analysis to wait. You're taking a risk. You're taking a risk here that yeah, we're saving some money, but we could be saving even more money if we limit this to a 24-month window or, whatever, 36-month window. But, in looking at the grid, there's not a lot of options to get us close to 0.0621 if you limit it to a smaller amount of time.
Rick, the only comment I would have to that is the reason why Illinois is so low is because we have 3 nuclear plants. Mm-hmm. And if they do anything regulatory-wise against those 3 nuclear plants,
right. Yep.
And I see that happening down the road. Yeah. So it may not happen in 5 years, right. But if those nuclear plants slow down,
right.
I
agree.
The enemy of good is better. And it's like buying a computer. If you just keep waiting, it's like, if I wait a little longer, the computer's price is going to drop, and you'll never buy a computer. Right? And it's
so
you just have to.
Personal experience, Rick. In the last, I think, 5 years, or I'm sorry, like maybe even 7 years ago, I got personally burned on gas. Never on electricity. But on gas, there was that one small window where it was like a year where I had locked in for 2 years, and for that last year, I was paying more than what the actual gas price was. However, the overall savings on my contract was still an overall savings, even with that 1 year of excessive gas. And there's also a huge value into having to shop this on an annual basis. And potentially running the risk of running a high rate.
Right.
It's always a struggle, though. I don't like signing contracts longer than 3, so everyone has their own threshold as to what they want, 1, 2, 3. But the longer you go, the better rate you get, so you got to roll the dice at some point.
The closest we get on a 3-year is 0.0630. So it's 9, whatever that is, 1,000th. Higher.
And we use a lot of energy.
No, I know.
That little bit, in my situation, 80,000 square feet of usage as opposed to what we have here, was proved to me on the electric side by only doing a 2-year contract instead of a 3, cost me about $22,000 by not signing on for 3 years. So I don't know. I mean, it's like you said. You roll the dice, you got to roll the dice somewhere.
Yep. Any other comments? I think we're ready to have a vote. Anybody want to make a motion? Mark, you're looking like you're ready.
I move that the Board of Education of Community Consolidated School District 64, Park Ridge, Niles, Illinois, approve the contract with the lowest responsible bidder on Tuesday, November 14th, 2017 for electrical service at a not-to-exceed price of .07 per kilowatt hour at all district buildings for a period not to exceed 60 months as presented.
Is there a second?
Second.
Tom's got the second, starting with Eastman.
Yes.
Yes.
No.
Yes.
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 Okay. Approval of the recommended personnel report. This is beginning on page 89, action item on page 90. We've been given revised personnel reports in front of us. Any questions, comments, additions, subtractions, modifications? Not hearing any, can I have a motion?
I move that the Board of Education of Community Consolidated School District 64, Park Ridge, Niles, Illinois, approve the consent agenda of November 13th, 2017. I'm sorry, am I doing the right one? No, I'm sorry.
Page 8, right? Isn't it the...
Yep, doing the personnel report, right?
Yeah.
Right. Approve the, oh, sorry, let me start over. I move that the Board of Education of Community Consolidated School District 64, Park Ridge, Niles, Illinois, approve the personnel report, noting that the personnel report is based on the recommendation of the superintendent and not upon the board's direct knowledge regarding any of the specific individuals selected for employment.
Is there a second?
Second.
Mark's got the second, starting with Fred.
Yes.
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 Okay. Next item, consent agenda, beginning on page 91. Action item on page 91. Anyone?
I move that the Board of Education of Community Consolidated School District 64, Park Ridge, Niles, Illinois, approve the consent agenda of November 13th, 2017, which includes bills, payroll, and benefits, approval of financial update for the period ending October 31st, 2017, and destruction of audio closed minutes.
Is there a second?
Second.
Rick's got the second, starting with Eastman.
Yes.
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 Yes. Yes.
And Tony, I'm sorry, I've got all bollocksed up in here, but if it's okay with the board, does anybody feel that Tony needs to remain?
The next 10
Nope. I'm sorry.
I figured we're near the end anyway.
I know, I got all excited that we're moving pretty quickly here, so.
Billable hour.
Yeah.
I will be done before I get done packing.
Dr. Hines.
Our next Board of Education meeting will be Monday, December 11th at Jefferson. At this point, we have the meeting starting at 6 o'clock. We do have one topic. We'll probably add another one or so to the agenda, but I think we should still be good beginning at 6 o'clock. We will have the board adjourned from closed, and we'll convene to a public hearing on the tax levy, and the meeting will start at 7. It's one of my favorite meetings because we'll have Emerson Orchestra students here, and they perform holiday music for us, so it just sets a very warm and festive atmosphere for the start of the meeting.
Quick point of order. Did we skip over approval of minutes, E10?
We did.
Yeah. Sorry. We did.
Thank you.
See, you're getting all excited. Beginning on page 182 with an action item on page 182.
Don't
we have
leave
the
yet,
approval
Tony.
of the minutes.
We might not pass the minutes and we need help. So.
Yeah. So 182, and Rick, since you brought that up, you make the motion.
Thanks a lot.
All right.
I move that the Board of Education of Community Consolidated School District 64, Park Ridge, Niles, Illinois, approve the minutes from the regular board meeting on October 23rd, 2017, the Committee of the Whole, update on strategic plan, balanced scorecard, curriculum and tech on October 10, 2017, and the special board meeting on October 10, 2017.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right, now that we have a second, I will throw it out there. Does anybody have any changes to any of the minutes? And not hearing any, we'll start with Fred.
Yes.
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 Okay, now, Dr.
Thank you.
Hunt.
Sorry.
I'm glad you caught it.
Rick, anything else, Rick?
No, I think we're all good.
Okay.
We will be adding the IGA again. I don't know if we'll want to discuss anything about it. I have a question mark if we need to have it on there. I've tried to put it on each meeting just to give you a brief update in terms of where we are within the process, so we will probably add that. One topic that we will start a discussion on with the board is the child care with confidence space and the current lease, so we're going to go ahead and start that conversation.
Do we have a time frame that we have to give advance notice if we're going to do anything?
It's typically 1 year, correct? Yeah.
1 year.
And then we'll flesh out this agenda a little further. We will be talking about the 18-19 calendar. I think that one will probably be ready for board approval. And 2019-2020 will be a tentative review for you.
That's my last one.
Next meeting is when?
The 11th of December at Jefferson. And Brian will come in.
And what time do you need us there?
6 o'clock. As per usual, we have the most recent FOIA requests within the packet. And you can always just take a peek at those. If you have any questions, let me know. District committees, Elementary Learning Foundation, we had a very successful Halloween hustle. We continue to plan for the casino night. The Traffic Safety Committee meeting took place last week. It was very uneventful, but we continue to have the local police departments, both Park Ridge and Niles, come out. They typically hear from building assistant principals if there's anything in which they can assist with in terms of making sure folks are following signs, traffic guidelines, bus arms, so on and so forth. Tomorrow morning we will meet with the PTA and PTO presidents. We have a very full agenda at that meeting. No MOIs for you, no board minutes. Hopefully you enjoyed finding out a little bit about how we celebrated Veterans Day last week. We got some nice coverage. There will be an article that I will share in case you didn't get to see it in my Friday memo. But really exciting to see how the schools each year are kind of up in their game in terms of honoring our veterans.
Biggest crowd we've ever had. We had 44 people there. It was amazing. We had a good 8 or 9 World War II vets. We haven't had that many in a long time.
Fantastic. Triple I is this weekend, so Luann and I will be down Thursday night, Friday, Saturday, coming home Sunday, so it's a busy conference. She's teaching a session. I'll be in a variety of sessions. I'm doing a safety session on Friday, which I'm looking forward to. I've asked Ron to join me for that one, and that is it.
Okay, I have a couple questions on the FOIA request that we have copies here. Normally, typically, we can see who's making the FOIAs, and I'm unable to make that determination. Well, there's one here from, it's actually from Madeline to somebody, WSD FOIA.
Well, they can be anonymous.
Sorry?
VVSD.
What is it?
They can be anonymous.
It's an anonymous FOIA?
That's correct.
Is that right?
Yep. Yes, you do not need to give a name.
Oh, really?
You can do it anonymously.
Okay. So there was a couple of them, actually.
There were 2.
Yeah.
2 of the
Interesting.
couple from
Yeah. And electronic devices and anyway.
female.
Yeah. Really?
Yep.
You want these confidential papers back?
No, you can, if you'd like to send them, you can. Otherwise, you can keep them, but they should remain, oh my goodness, confidential.
They absolutely should remain confidential. So if there's no other business to report, I take a motion to close the meeting.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Need an oral voice vote for this, Eastman?
Yes.
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 Terrific. Thank you, everybody.